Hi, I'm Carlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Carolyn Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well. Welcome to Friday. And Friday, of course, means happy hour. And, it's been a crazy week. We've had a lot of Supreme Court decisions come out. And so I thought we'd take it easy. Pride Month is wrapping up. You don't want to do anything too controversial that could bother too many people on Twitter to get all in a flutter about God knows what. So I thought that for happy hour to close out the month of June, we would take a rather, uncontroversial topic just for shits and giggles. And I found what I think is going to be a really good video for today. It is from yesterday. It is brand new. It was streamed yesterday on the internet at 7 p.m. from St. Andrew's Church in Canada, of course, because Canada is like a next level preview of where all this stuff is going. We are going to talk today about what is queer theology. And you can even see this is indeed in a church. And that looks like to me to be the progress flag hanging in the church. So I'm sure absolutely nothing controversial is going to happen in this presentation at all. Sometimes you just get lucky when you're looking for these presentations. Let me read you the description. Join us on June 29th in person or online as we explore queer theology with the Reverend Dr. Natalie Wiggs Stevenson, Associate Professor of Contextual Education and Theology at Emmanuel College. Morgan Bell will lead a conversation with Natalie where they will discuss questions like, what is queer theology? How is it queer? How is it theological? How do queer experiences shed light on the Christian faith and vice versa? How do queer theology help us follow Jesus better? That's pretty like the the words that have to come out of my mouth sometimes. How does queer theology help us to follow Jesus? I'm making a t-shirt in my head right now, I'll tell you. So the Christians will not be upset at all with me today. I'm gonna be I'm gonna be like a Christian hero again, just what I've always wanted. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, I know. I don't know the rest of that rhyme. I didn't go to church. Anyway, so that is what we're doing on Happy Hour today, guys. Happy Hour is a show that we do on Fridays at 5 p.m. where we watch a full woke training from start to finish. We watch the boring bits, we watch the cringy bits, and I firmly believe everyone that attends Happy Hours on Fridays and then Socialism Saturdays on Saturdays, which will happen tomorrow at 6 p.m., know more about what's going on in the woke left than pretty much anyone else on the internet. Oh, that's right, bot. For the Bible tells me that's why I didn't remember it because I don't believe in that particular book. Jesus loves me. Yes, I know. For the Bible tells me so. Yay! Now I can be a Christian too. Isn't that great? So the reason that people who attend happy hour on a regular basis know more about what's going on in the woke left than anyone else on the internet. You know more about what's going on in the woke left than the pundits. You know more about what's going on in the woke left than the so-called journalists, the so-called experts, with the possible exception of James Lindsay, is that we watch them in their full form. In their we watch the woke in the wild in their natural environment where they only believe they're talking to each other, but then they film what they say and put it on the internet. And how nice of them to do that, because that gives us the opportunity to kind of like peer in and get a glimpse into what is going on in the world of the woke. And because of that, I firmly believe we're like about 2 years ahead of where most people are in their understanding of what's going on in the woke left, simply because we listen to it so much. You can't fake this, guys. You actually got to sit your asses down, do the work. We try to do the work, as it were. We try to make it interesting for happy hour to keep it entertaining. In fact, I'm pulling up bingo right now. Might as well do a little genderqueer bingo today for shits and giggles. Let me put this genderqueer bingo card in the chat. If you've never played bingo with us before, oh no, where'd my StreamYard go? There it is. If you've never played bingo with us before, we'll get to that one in a second. This is super duper easy. Here's your link to the bingo card. Let me put this up on Rumble as well, because I'm sure the good Christians at Rumble today will be thrilled to hear about theology being queered. I'm definitely not going to get any shit for this. Even though I didn't do it, I'm just reporting on this stuff. I didn't actually do the presentation or anything. Anyway, once you get your bingo card, you go ahead and click generate card, and that will generate a unique bingo card for you. This is going to be genderqueer bingo, since we are talking about queer theology today. Anytime you hear one of these words uttered in the course of this presentation, you get a square, you get a free one in the middle, and then we're going for lines or we're going for corners if you want to do some fruity other configuration, because this is queer bingo after all. So really, you can queer your bingo if you want to. You can play by your own rules. You don't win anything for winning, so you might as well, right? Shout out bingo in the chat when you get it. Once you get a single bingo and we get a first winner, we're going for blackout bingo after that. I'm pretty sure we still haven't actually gotten a blackout bingo on happy hour. We got blackout bingo in regards to a midweek stream we did about the Portland, Oregon school district, but I don't think so much about happy hour. But that's okay. Maybe we'll change that today. So really, guys, that's what is going on. I don't have any announcements other than that. I'm kind of been in a week where I've been getting back from vacation. I've been slacking a little bit in some of my content duties in terms of putting stuff up on the Substack and stuff like that. But you know what? Sometimes that just happens when you come back from vacation. And I know you guys do forgive me, but I did write an article last night for the Substack that I would like to bring to everyone's attention. You can go over to Carlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. And this is my main content hub. I highly recommend everyone get subscribed to the Substack. It is free to subscribe, but if you want to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business, you can sign up for $5 a month or $50 a year. That gets you access to the premium archives on the Substack, because some content is behind a paywall, and there will be more content going behind a paywall in the foreseeable future. I've just been slacking on it lately, but there is going to be more content going behind the paywall, so you might want to get set up on that now. You also get access to 2 Zoom calls with me every single week on Mondays and on Fridays. Excuse me, Mondays and Wednesdays. And then you get access to the supporter Discord as well, where we do movie nights on Sunday. Does anyone know what movie Jennifer chose for this Sunday? I forget. It's some sort of Patriot movie. Is it Independence Day? It's got to be Independence Day. She chose Independence Day, right? I'm pretty sure she chose Independence Day now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, we will be watching some sort of patriotic movie on Sunday at 8 p.m. in the supporter Discord, and you will get access to that by becoming a member of my Substack or of my locals or of my Patreon or of my YouTube channel. It's up to you, but I encourage the Substack. And then what happens is on Sunday, I send out an email that looks a whole lot like this. It's called the Unwoke Roundup, and it will have all your supporter perks in the bottom of the email to include your link to the Discord, your Zoom links, etc., etc., etc. But I do want to just point out this article that I did write last night for the Substack called Sadly, RFK has proven himself to be a Democrat. I always knew this would happen. I was like, listen, man, I know a lot of people are excited about RFK. I get it. He's very good on vaccines. He's very good on the lockdown stuff. He's saying some interesting things. I like that he's shaking things up. I like that he's scaring the ever loving hell out of the Democratic establishment. But we need to admit that RFK is woke, okay? Like he is. He basically last night after the affirmative action decision came down from the Supreme Court, RFK basically went full Ibram X Kendi. He was like, "We need discrimination now to fix discrimination in the future." And I was like, "Bro, you don't solve racism with more racism. That just doesn't make any sense." And so and then today he came out basically like, okay, I think that the Biden administration is still going to get away with this student loan stuff. And like I said, I'm cheering for it, man. If we're on the long, slow descent into socialism, I want my socialism too. I want my student loans paid for. And so I actually don't have a problem with this. I know it's going to piss a lot of people off. But again, everyone else is getting socialism. I know we talk about how bad socialism is, and if we lived in a world where enough people cared about socialism being bad, I might feel a little bit more guilty about taking my little slice of socialism as well. But if everyone else is going to get benefits, I want my student loans paid for. Anyway, the Supreme Court struck down Biden's original plan today. They've got a whole bunch of other backup plans that they're going to be working on now, but RFK again. See, at least I admit when I'm being hypocritical. I know I'm advancing socialism by saying I want my student loans paid for. All right, it's purely selfish. There's no other reason for it. I understand that. It wouldn't be the end of the world if it didn't happen, but I like, come on. But RFK unironically was like, it's too bad the Supreme Court didn't uphold this Biden thing. So RFK is a Democrat, RFK is woke, RFK is sadly probably a useful idiot. And, I just think we need to be aware of stuff like this. That's all I'm saying. Just be aware of who you're voting for. Just because you like his position on vaccines doesn't mean he's not a leftist. He's still a Democrat. And we all damn well should have known better. Anyway, if you want more information about that, that is on my Substack right now. And you can go and check it out at Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com and get subscribed while you're there. All right, guys, that is pretty much the last thing. Of course, though, because this is happy hour, I need a beer. And I'm very lucky because I have all sorts of leftover beer from PorkFest because Phil kept being like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Kino kept being like, "You don't have enough beer, Carlin. You don't have enough beer. You don't have enough beer." I was like, "All right, I can go get some more beer. Beer will never go to waste." And then we didn't even drink all the damn beer. God, it's like can't do anything. Anyway, I have my 4-pack. Let me grab it from the cooler. And we are doing a stout day, ladies and gentlemen. It is an Imperial Stout today. I have an Imperial Stout 4-pack. Let me tell you what we have on the docket here. I'm definitely not going to get drunk. Well, you know what, Bot? I do actually have purple beer downstairs. I think I'm going to drink it tomorrow for Socialism Saturday. It's not really beer. It's more like a seltzer. It's a grape seltzer, but I do actually have purple drink downstairs. What is a stout? A stout is a very dark beer that usually isn't bitter and usually can kind of have like a nice dessert taste to it. There are all sorts of different types of stouts. There are don't drink those Russian stouts. Russian stouts are dangerous. But we got some good dessert stouts today. Now, because how this works is that we have a tradition on happy hour that I put a poll in the chat and you guys get to decide which beer I drink first. These are all Imperials today, so I'm definitely not going to get drunk on the internet. That's absolutely not going to happen. Because I was in the woods with the Libertarians all last week, we're going to start off with a nice little hippie beer. This is called Keep It Crunchy. It is a granola stout. This is from breweries whose name I'm not going to pronounce, and I'm pretty sure is in Maine. And let's see, what does it say? This handy granola stout is the perfect companion for your next outdoor adventure. Elaborate and flavorful, keenly suggestive of the balanced complexity of Mother Nature. Be prepared to be elevated to chocolate foam capped mountain heights. And this has got stout with natural flavors and caramel color, cranberry, pecan, toasted oats, cocoa nips, and vanilla. That's going to be our granola stout. That is option number 1. That is an 8%er. Next up, s'mores. Now, one of the things I found out about my friend Gabrielle Clark this week is Gabrielle Clark is kind of like a s'mores wizard. She's not just the mom that filed the first ever CRT lawsuit against CRT in schools in the country. She's not just a mom that teaches other parents how to detransition their kids or get their kids to desist when they get sucked into radical gender ideology. She also makes a mean s'more. I'm just telling you. She had a whole spread of gourmet s'mores ingredients. And what did I do? Because I'm an idiot. I just ate marshmallows because I don't actually really like s'mores, but I was very impressed with the spread, but I enjoyed the marshmallows the best. Anyway, this is called S'mores Accident, and this is a marshmallow chocolate stout. Let's see. I think this is from Smutty Nose, actually. Smutty Nose is in Vermont. That's all it says. It is a marshmallow chocolate stout s'mores. Cheers. And then next we have, this is from Rockingham Brewing Company. I think this is in New Hampshire. It is in New Hampshire. This is a Belgian truffle beer. I love the can of this beer. I like black and white things. That looks pretty fancy. This is, oh gosh, beer's falling off my lap. This is a Belgian style chocolate stout, brewed with organic Bolivian cacao husk from Loon Chocolate. So fancy schmancy chocolate and a fancy smanchy beer. Let's see, what is the alcohol content of this? Oh, this is only 6.8%. Oh, that'd be very nice if we could start with a 6%er. That'd be pretty great. And then the last one is a beer I've actually had before on the channel. It is none other than Belly of the Beast itself. Guys, this is an Imperial Bacon Stout. Imperial Bacon Stout, 8.6% alcohol. This is also a New Hampshire beer. And it says, delve through the dense froth into cavernous black layers of roasted malts engulfed with smoke and infused with salty sweet bacon if you dare to enter the belly of the beast. So it's a stout kind of day, guys. Those are the beers we have in the poll for the vote. Let me put the poll in the chat over on YouTube. And again, we've got granola beer. We've got s'mores. We've got Belgian chocolate truffle. And we have the Belly of the Beast, the bacon beer itself. Register your vote. I don't actually really care which one you guys pick because I love stouts. Stouts are pretty great. In the meantime, I will remind you to mount that like button for me. Mounting the like button lets other people know to come in and join us on the channel. Sam will be drinking a limited time soda. If you're drinking anything fun, let us know in the chat. Let me get the sound set up here. Queer theology while drinking a stouty rich beer. I think this sounds pretty great. All right, let me see. Oh, actually a definitive choice it looks like. We're going to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for voting. And it looks like you guys wanted this Belgian chocolate beer. Excellent. I'm kind of surprised about that. I thought it was going to be s'mores or bacon, but that's cool. That's cool. Nick, did you guys get that moonshine at PorkFest? There was definitely homemade moonshine on sale at PorkFest in 2 tents over from us. But then there was a rumor at PorkFest that the moonshine that people had wasn't real moonshine. How rude to say you're selling real moonshine to someone and it's not real moonshine. All right, let me see. Aaron says, if I say mix them all and drink via straw, would you ban me? No, of course I wouldn't ban you. But why would you do that to perfectly good beer? This is like, Aaron. This is sipping beer, my friend. This is beer that you enjoy. In fact, we enjoy it so much. Hang on. Don't drink it out of any, regular glass. I drink my beer out of a wine glass because I got to be extra fancy. Look at that. You don't mix all these stouts together. These are a thing of beauty, my friend. Sin, we'll see you later. Thanks for stopping by. Cheers, everyone. Happy Friday. We made it through another week. All right, let's get into it, guys. We are watching Queer Theology. What could possibly go wrong with this stream? Nothing, of course. Let's get this party started. Oh, Canadians are already having sound troubles. I can already hear it.
Territory that
Oh, there we go. Who thinks there's going to be a land blessing? I think it's going to be a land blessing. We'll see.
friends. Well, whether you're joining us in person or if you're joining us online, I would like to welcome you to St. Andrew's United Church here at Yonge and Bloor. My name is Morgan Bell, and along with Reverend Neil Young, I'm one of the ministers here. And we are super delighted to have with us the Reverend Dr. Natalie Wigg-Stevenson, who I will further introduce in a moment. But first, I just want to make a couple notes. If you're new to the church, there's bathrooms just out. If you walk out of the sanctuary to your right, you'll find some bathrooms there. And we acknowledge that we gather on territory that's traditional to the Huron, Wendat, and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And we acknowledge that this territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is a sacred agreement for the Ojibwe and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes Basin. And we lament all the ways that we continue to forsake that treaty and to break it, and we strive to make right with all our relations.
I guess that was a land blessing.
Yes.
Well, that wasn't a question. I was just going to introduce you.
But you said it to me,
Yes.
so I thought it was for me. Please go ahead.
So we are delighted to have Natalie with us. Natalie is the Associate Professor of Contextual Education and Theology at Emmanuel College, which is a United Church-affiliated theological school at the University of Toronto. Natalie is an ordained Baptist minister. She's a graduate. She's a graduate of Vanderbilt University, that august institution, and she's the author of 2 books. The first one is called Ethnographic Theology, so literally wrote the book on her discipline. And then the second just came out last year, I suppose, correct?
I think 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's called Transgressive Devotion, Theology as Performance Art. And if I'm on the ball, I have some quotes here that I'm going to pepper our conversation with, but it's an excellent read. I highly recommend it, and it is sold wherever fine books are sold. And if you are like me and you've sold your soul to Jeff Bezos, you can buy it on Kindle. Not one laugh. That's great. Why don't we start with a quick prayer? Okay. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you that we can worship you with our bodies.
Socialist sound again. Hang on. Oh, God.
Intellects.
I just want to make something really clear. The sound is crackly. It is not my fault. It is their fault. We're just going to have to manage, okay? Socialists, and these are obviously socialists. They're talking about queer theology, okay? They're obviously socialists. They suck at technology. They screw it up all the time. I apologize. There ain't nothing I can do about it. We're just going to have to weather the storm until they figure it out. They usually get their shit together a good 15 minutes into the presentation. Just sit tight. It'll be fine.
And so be with us now as we bend the knee of our intellects before you. Fill this place with your spirit and guide us into closer communion with you. All this we pray in the name of the risen and living Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
They're praying to Jesus before they talk about queer theology.
So tonight we are considering
How
the
do the
question,
Christians
what
feel
is
about that?
queer theology? And Natalie just happens to be a queer theologian and an expert in queer theology. Expert. So
Someone actually has a job as a queer theologian. Is she the Reverend? She's the Reverend? This is going to be great.
we're getting our money's
Yeah,
worth,
yeah.
folks. So Natalie, can you tell us what is queer theology? What's queer
Yes,
about
Natalie.
it? What's theological
Tell us
about
about
it?
queer theology,
Yeah, I'll
Natalie.
let you take it from there.
Great. Well, first, thank you so much for having me
Oh,
here.
Beth, I'm so glad you're here. I picked out this presentation just for you so you wouldn't be mad at me anymore, Beth. I want you to feel like I'm on the side of the Christians. I might actually defend the Christians today. from the queer theologians.
Everybody online, is that how we do this? Do we wave to the people online? It's great to be here with you tonight. Thanks for coming out. So I teach the first queer theology course that's ever been taught at the Toronto School of Theology, which is a little mind-boggling to me.
The Toronto School of Theology is teaching a queer theology course. Canada, always ahead of the game. Those pesky Canadians.
But and the way that I try to explain it to my students is that this is a very different discipline than, say, doing what used to be called gay and lesbian studies, which were focused primarily on trying to create different kind of theological understandings that open the church up to inclusion of people who would embody some kind of queer identity. Queer theology differs from that, not that in that it's not affirming, it is affirming, but that's its baseline, and it moves quickly away from that in terms of trying to reimagine how we conceive of the divine through the kinds of language Christianity has always used.
Holy shit. Okay. So if you are new to the land of queer, if you have stumbled upon this channel because you're like, this leftist crazy woman with stupid hair is talking about queer theology and you're like offended or something, here's what you need to understand about queer. Yes, exactly, Akshay. Oh Lord, give me strength. Exactly. So queer is not the same as trans, it's not the same as gay, it's not the same as any of those things. It is a far left political ideology that has hijacked extremely successfully the LGBT movement to make everyone think that queer and trans or queer and LGBT are like synonymous, but they're not. Queer is Marxist, okay? It is a political ideology. It is not an identity. It is not a sexual orientation. It is like you don't have to be anything to be queer. You don't have to sleep with anyone to be queer, right? So what you need to know going into this is that part of the purpose of critical queer theory, which is a nice way to say queer Marxism, is that they want to destabilize societal norms. That is the explicit goal of critical queer theory, destabilizing societal norms. What this woman has just said is that queer theology is about reimagining our relationship with the divine. This is probably going to end up being like one of the most blasphemous presentations we watch all week. This is going to be great.
Is to conceive of and relate with the divine. If we were to remove from that all the kind of heteronormative, all the kind of heterosexual underpinnings of all theological thinking.
Pop quiz, what does heteronormativity mean? Does anyone know in the chat? We're 5 minutes into this presentation. This is going to be great. What does heteronormativity mean? Oh yeah, we're going to rewind and watch that whole little intro segment again. Kind of a new wrinkle on the brain podcast. Kind of, yes. Cis would be part of heteronormativity. It means you follow straight rules. That's exactly right. Heteronormativity is like you date someone and you fall in love and you get married and you settle down and you buy a house and you have kids and a dog and a white picket fence and you believe in capitalism. In capitalism, exactly, you are part of the normal. Exactly. So what this person is saying is that all of this normal stuff, when it comes to theology, we just needed to throw it right out the window. And that is how we're going to queer theology. Exactly. You are part of the oppressive class, the bourgeoisie, the power owners. Exactly. I just want to rewind a little bit to get her saying this whole sentence all at once. Because this woman is already crazy. What is queer theology?
Create different kind of theological understandings that open the church up to inclusion of people who would embody some kind of queer identity. Queer theology differs from that, not that in that it's not affirming, it is affirming, but that's its baseline, and it moves quickly away from that in terms of trying to reimagine how we conceive of the divine through the kinds of language Christianity has always used to conceive of and relate with the divine. If we were to
How we conceive of and relate to the divine.
remove from that all the kind of heteronormative, all the kind of heterosexual underpinnings of all theological thinking. And then to reimagine with a wider diversity of human sexuality and gender diversity. That might sound, I'm not sure if that actually makes complete sense.
Yeah, so let's bring it down a level.
I'm not sure if it's bringing it down, but the thing that excites me about queer theology is that our desire for God is kind of at the heart of Christian faith. Our desire for and our yearning towards the divine is the core of how we love God. It's a drawing, it's a luring. God is always reaching towards us, and we are reaching back towards God. And that's, to me, at the heart of queer theology, this idea of desire for the divine that we then begin to understand in many, many different ways. If you think throughout Christian history of the ways desire for God has been understood, it's always had a very heterosexual orientation to it. And queer theology kind of takes that.
What the hell does that even
affective.
mean? What does it mean that that the relationship with God has had a heterosexual orientation? Why has a relationship with God had any sexual orientation at all? That makes no sense. Autumn, the socialist, can you explain this to us, please? Why is a relationship with God considered to be a heterosexual orientation? I mean, you call God Father, okay, I get that, but isn't that more like patriarchy? Yeah, but that's like patriarchy. Methinks the story of Sodom and Gomorrah sets up what Christianity thinks of queerness already. Does it? Or is that more about adultery than it was about queerness? Because again, remember, queerness isn't about being gay. It's a far left political ideology. You don't need to be gay to be queer. Christ is the bridegroom and the church is the bride. Okay. All right. See, Autumn, we keep you around for instances like this. We need you to go make some Christian socialist friends. Can you go do some research on this, please, and report back? All members of this community need to be contributing, Autumn. Can you go ask Sam Cedar about queer theology and see what he says? That'd be really helpful. Huh.
Orientation to the divine and begins to open it up to really think about all the ways that humans can experience desire and desire for God in ways that are, as the name goes, queered, among other things.
Wait, desire for
Yeah,
God?
you look like you want to follow up.
I can.
Go for it.
No, actually, this reminds me of one of the quotes that I mined from your book in preparation for this. So
She wrote a book about
little
this?
edgy, but that's queer theology.
We're like 2 minutes in. Are
I
we supposed to
know.
be edgy already?
Well, this is edgy in a different way. We'll get to the sexy, edgy stuff in a bit. So you've written in Transgressive Devotion that progressive Christianity's polite divine being wants to gently usher us into new modes of.
She wrote a book called Transgressive Devotion. I almost spit out my beer. Transgressive Devotion.
Life together. What of the God who will batter my heart, who will enthrall me, force, break, burn, and imprison me? What of those bodies that yearn for destruction, for dissolution?
We just got started.
I know.
Morgan.
Well, we're kicking off.
Warm.
So,
Okay.
yeah, you talk about this affective dimension of theology, the divine pull, the lure, and those sorts of things. But you want to talk about those, it seems to me, on a fairly different level. So, can you talk about some of your work in queer theory and how that helps us understand this affective orientation of theology, of Christian life? What does our desire and all of that have to do with a God who desires us?
Yeah, so part of
Does anyone else feel like they're talking about a relationship with God in a way that is more sexual than I'm comfortable with? And I'm not like a prude by any means, but Is this making anyone else feel uncomfortable? Even though queer is not about a sexual orientation, but, like, they're kind of framing it that way?
What Morgan's pulling out here is that in this book, I wanted to push not just on sort of conservative, anti-queer kind of approaches to theology, but also on liberal approaches to theology as well, that wanted to shy away
Well, that
from
is
sort of the
a
terror and the
fair
fear
point.
and the wonder and the
Fair point well made.
majesty of God. And part of what had happened, at least in earlier classical feminist theologies, was this kind of moving away from any idea of God as sort of all powerful. This became seen as sort of a sadomasochistic divine who just wanted to control us. And this quote from John Donne's poem, oh, you're so much better at John Donne than I am. What is the poem? Batter my heart,
three-person God.
Three-person God, yeah. It became kind of a touchstone piece that people would criticize of, well, John Donne wants to be beaten up by God, and therefore that's bad. I was like, well, what if John Donne was actually just a little into something a bit more kinky?
What?
And was
They're in a church right now. They're in a church talking about God and kinky. We're only 10 minutes into this presentation. Can we rewind a little bit? Hang on. Oh, sadomasochistic. Oh, that's good. Okay.
the fear and the wonder and the majesty of God.
I am too. This is so
And
great.
part of what had happened, at least in earlier classical feminist theologies, was this kind of moving away from any idea of God as sort of all powerful. This became seen as sort of a sadomasochistic divine who just wanted to control us. And this quote,
God is a sadomasochist.
from John Donne's poem, oh, you're so much better at John Donne than I am. What is the poem? Batter my heart,
three-person God.
Three-person God, yeah. It became kind of a touchstone piece that people would criticize of, well, John Donne wants to be beaten up by God, and therefore that's bad. I was like, well, what if John Donne was actually just a little into something a bit more kinky?
Oh my
and was,
God.
It's not that he wants to be.
Yes, bot. This is a reference to BDSM. Very good. Very good. How does everyone feel about God being just a little bit kinky with the sadomasochism? I'm sorry, we're gonna No! Oh God, I do have a special paddle emoji, don't I? Okay, we're gonna listen to this one more time because I need to wrap my head around God being a sadomasochist.
What is the poem?
We haven't busted out the
Batter
paddle
my
in a
heart,
while.
three-person God.
Three-person God, yeah.
God.
It became kind of a touchstone piece that people would criticize of, well, John Donne wants to be beaten up by God, and therefore that's bad. I was like, well, what if John Donne was actually just a little into something a bit more kinky, and was, it's not that he wants to be beaten up by God in a bad way, but maybe wants to enjoy a certain kind of awareness of the power dynamics between the divine and the human.
My God.
And that this queerness, this kinkiness to the poem that he's writing actually lifts that up. And instead of saying we have to choose between God is either all powerful and that's a terrible thing, or God is not really into power, me and God were kind of like the same. On the other side, there's this in queer theology, there's this interest in actually really heightening these power dynamics in the same way as happens in certain forms of kink and queer kind of play. And so I'm interested in using those kinds of approaches of thinking about power in a queered way to understand the divine human relationship.
Yes, this is for real.
I yearn for God.
Oh, I bet you do, honey.
For God. I am a former charismatic evangelical, still kind of one, progressive, whatever. I don't even know what I would name myself as. But that old world I come from, they knew a really powerful, terrifying, and desiring God. And I don't want to let that God stay just there.
God is a desiring God. Don't ever let it be said that I'm the most blasphemous person on the internet again. I have never called God a sadomasochist. I have never wanted to engage in kink play with God. I have never said anywhere remotely close to any of these things. Oh, yes, this might be the presentation that actually breaks me. This yo, do it, do it, do it. Everyone get a drink. Okay, let's take a break. Hang on. Everyone go get something alcoholic right now. Yes, I bet she is into that. Isn't that a very like Catholic thing to do where you have the whip with the knots and you like I'm pretty Hang on, I got to get a super chat. Let me see. Where's that super chat? James Jones. Like the Clyban cartoon, why do you hang around with that sadist? Beats me. Uh-huh. Ha ha, James Jones. I agree. Wow. Oh no, Grandma Nay, you should go back. Go back to the beginning of the we did just a little bit. You need to watch what we just watched. It's actually crazy. Well, does anyone remember how religion was practiced in Brave New World? That was through fucking, wasn't it? Everyone belongs to everyone else. You will own nothing and you will be happy. There were no families. There were just endless dates and trysts and no committed relationships at all. Why'd you have what? Why? Why? Why would you do that to us, a New Wrinkle on the Brain podcast? The Passion of the Christ is taking on a whole new meaning, isn't it? All right, let's go.
Want to know that God from my progressive politics as well.
Well, and that's interesting from like another part of your book too, because we could sort of say, well, that's sort of weird charismatic Christianity as we would want to do in a progressive tradition. But it's more than just sort of contemporary charismatic Christianity, right? This goes back through the Christian tradition. So you've written a bit on Beatrice of Nazareth, who, for those of you who might not know, she's a 13th century Flemish nun. Am I right? A Cistercian nun?
Yes.
Hang on. What the hell are you guys talking about in the Discord? But this is not an advertisement for the Discord, all right? God, I have to monitor everything at all times to make sure it doesn't go off the rails.
Yes. If you see this on the internet later, can you Google it for us and then get back to us?
And then just put it in the comments if I just got it wrong.
That's right. And so you write this in your book about just these power dynamics and the mix of desire with them. So on Beatrice, you write, Eucharistic starvation, bodily restriction and bondage, piercing her flesh with thorns. Beatrice is known for her ruthless asceticism. She pursued discomforting mixtures of desire and violence, pleasure and pain, and spirit unleashed through broken flesh that presaged the Marquis de Sade's dungeons and served as templates for contemporary communities of BDSM practitioners. 50 Shades of Grey pales in comparison to Beatrice's piety. You want to unpack that, Natalie Wick-Stevenson?
Morgan said we were going to start kind of slow.
Everyone here is an adult, right? Cider, are you here? Are you secretly watching Cider? Cover your ears if you're watching Cider. Cider is a high school student that hangs around sometimes. And you guys thought you had to be worried about the books in your kid's school? No, this is happening in a church.
I'm really worried about what's coming in the second hour.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah, well, there is a tradition throughout Christian history among who we typically would refer to as mystics or ascetics, people who take on these extreme bodily practices to form their bodies in a way that are open, transcendent to divine presence.
I'm already there.
Incredibly
This feels
erotic
wrong.
language
I feel like
that
I've
often
crossed a
gets
line.
cleaned up in translations or cleaned up by sort of the parameters that get put around the text when it's published. But at the heart of these stories are people just yearning to the point of self-destruction for the divine. And I'm not saying everyone needs to be this way in the same way that, like, it's okay.
Don't try this at
Don't
home.
But there are practices these people have taken on throughout history that do look like contemporary kink practices in many ways. And there's a lot of philosophical work done on trying to look at the similarities among these that are disciplining the body into forms of transcendence that open awareness and connection with the divine. They're but I mean, even right now, I'm sweating a little talking
Well,
about
you
this.
should be. You're in a church.
Like,
You're in
well,
a church.
actually, maybe a lot of people don't like to get smacked around in the bedroom or at the pulpit, right? There's not
What?
everybody is into that, and not everybody has.
I want everyone to know I'm not actually screwing around right now. I am genuinely shocked. This is so much more crazy than I ever dare dream it would be. I never expect. What the fuck is wrong with Canada? What is going on? Rottweiler said, yes, that's the Marxist infiltration of the churches through liberation theologians. Paulo Freire was one of the pioneers. Paulo Freire strikes again, man. Every single time. Beth says, I'm relieved you're not taking their side on this, Carlin. LOL. Otherwise, we'd have a problem. Listen, man, I like BDSM as much as the next person, but I do know that I did not, of course, that's going to get clipped and put on the internet somewhere, like whatever. But I have lines of propriety, okay? I'm not going to talk about that in a church. Like, what is wrong with this woman? Exactly. Blame Canada. Blame Canada. I cannot believe we're watching this. Seriously, I don't even know what to say. Rena says Christian progressivism perverts the Bible in every way. They teach us basically what we read is not what it says.
Has to be. But what intrigues me are the ways in which these certain kinds of practices throughout history have enabled people to transcend their own, let's say, bodily or self-coherence in ways that open them up to the inexplicable, unexplainable, unimaginable.
No, Autumn, don't start
And
rumors.
I don't think everyone needs to be doing that. I mean, this is why queer theology is less about inclusion and trying to sort of draw everyone into a normative way of being, and much more about seeking to disrupt what our norms are, to see when we do that, what kind of possibilities open up for how we might relate to God. And so it's always a bit, I'm like thrown off a bit because we've jumped straight into the BDSM and kink, which I thought we were going to sneak in at the end. But the idea—
Lay it all on the table.
It's right out there. The idea here being is that we have these kinds of ways of thinking theologically, of constructing our Christian practice, of approaching God, that are shaped by certain kinds of parameters of what we might call decency, what the theologian Marcella Altuis Reed called.
What? Bot, why are you looking at Pornhub right now? There's a whole Christian porn link for Pornhub. But it's not like real Christian, right? It's like, it's okay. We're not going to go down that road. Hang on. I'm gonna stop that conversation right now. Bot, stop looking at Pornhub. Jesus Christ.
Decency, and that if we want to really unlock our theological imaginations to open up new ways of encountering the divine, it requires becoming indecent in a certain way, and that attached—
If we want to unlock new ways of connecting with the divine, it requires becoming indecent in a certain way. Let's listen to that again.
what the theologian Marcella Altuis Reed calls decency, and that if we want to really unlock our theological imaginations to open up new ways of encountering the divine, it requires becoming indecent in a certain way, and that attached to sexual decency also come certain ideas of economic decency, colonial decency. You can list all the things that
God,
liberals
it's
care
so
about
true.
decency.
It's so true.
They're all sort of connected with each other, and when you can break open the sexual story, you become able to also break open all these other stories as well, that like I say, open our theological imaginations for the possible. So what can be quite tricky, and I often forget to kind of frame when I'm talking about queer theology, and often I have TAs who help remind me that this part's important too when I'm freaking out students, that
See,
these are not.
what happened to this? What happened to this? Christian porn used to be happily married couples in the missionary position only. No one ends up having a good time. It's all for procreation. That's it. With under the covers, with the lights off. This is what Christian porn should be, not this queer theology bullshit. Lord help us if this woman, I don't know, I might fall out of my chair if this woman like pulls out like a sex toy. Okay, Beth, I'm willing to concede that maybe sometimes you guys do a position that's other than missionary, all right? This is why Beth is queen of the chat, because even though Beth is a conservative Christian, she likes Beth used to be a saucy lass. We know that.
Suggestions for how one has to live. I'm not knocking them. I can see on some of your faces, some of you like these suggestions. It's a nice way to spend a Tuesday afternoon, but they're not. It's Wednesday today, isn't it?
I'm gonna have to find a new church tomorrow.
Not talking about what I did yesterday. You're pouring the water now. They're not suggestions for what you have to do. You don't, but they're ways of thinking about the divine. If we destabilize the kind of normative underpinnings of the ways we think about God, many new things become possible. And when we're thinking about God in different ways, we're relating to God in different ways. And for me, I'm
Apparently
always wanting to
so.
think about and relate to God through yearning. Deep and wild yearning, because I believe that God yearns deeply with great desire for me.
Yeah.
Us, not just me, but me. And you.
That's helpful, Natalie. And so, I mean, we did jump right into sort of the kinky BDSM stuff, right? But I think that helpfully kind of puts on the table that we are not about a decent enterprise tonight. It's kind of an indecent enterprise. But there's been some critique of queer theology precisely on that score. It's shock and awe.
I legitimately almost just spit out my beer when he was like, this is not about a decent enterprise. Tonight we are doing an indecent enterprise. James Jones says, then there was Saint Teresa of, I don't know what that word is, an angel pierced her heart with a dart. I don't know what any of that means, James Jones, but I appreciate the super chat. American legend, we didn't need to know this. Listen, as a Christian, I enjoy your releases as much as anyone. Anyone else shoot probably more than average. Well, as long as you're satisfied, American legend, I'm happy for you. And God loves you and wants you to be happy and all that stuff.
For shock and awe's sake, right? What would you say to that? That there can be some pretty explicit messaging in queer theology. Some parts of your book, I did some interesting Google searches to be like, what is that? And let's just say I had to clear my browser history afterwards. But that has a purpose, I think you would want to argue. And what is the purpose of that other than, disruption for disruption's sake? How do you do that in a judicious way, right? Yeah, I'll let you go for that.
I think people do it, many queer theologians do it differently. One thing that I think is particularly interesting about queer theology that we've talked about. So Morgan was actually, I think you were still an MDiv student when I wrote the draft of this book. And Morgan is one of the smartest students I've ever had. And a really incredible reader. And so I gave him the draft and said, could you give me some feedback on this, please? And he gave me actually fairly intimidating feedback. It was very insightful. But one of his first...
I was terrified of Natalie for 4 full calendar years. So favor returned.
So nice. But one of the first things he said was, like, his generation has just had, I think, what was it, like a fire hose of sexuality thrown at you since you were born. He's like, but you're really Orthodox. I had no idea. Like the shock level for him, and it has been for other people as well in reading some of my work, is that I'm incredibly doctrinally Orthodox. And that's kind of the bringing together of these really deep, historical, rich wisdom traditions with these potentially shocking ways that some people live their lives. It unlocks, I think, this new possibility of encounter. A lot of queer theologians do work with deeply traditional approaches to theology because they give us these kind of, well, those of you who do know about kink and BDSM will hear where this is going, but they
Oh,
give us these
good.
fairly
Good.
strict
Exactly what I was
structures
hoping
and
for.
parameters that you can then rupture and rearrange.
Wait. Is she about to say, okay, I'm about to reveal that I know more about BDSM than I want the internet knowing. Is she about to say something to the effect of like, I'm not gonna say. I don't want you guys to know how much I know. Okay, I don't want you guys knowing how much I know. Okay, we're gonna go back. I just want to rewind a little bit. I have a suspicion about where this is going. Is all I'm saying. I know enough to be dangerous, Autumn. All right. God.
A lot of queer theologians do work with deeply
Well, they did
traditional
tie Jesus
approaches
up
to
and whip him.
theology
That's very
because they
true.
give us
I'm gonna
these
watch The
kind
Passion
of,
of the Christ later.
well, those of you who do know about kink and BDSM will hear where this is going, but they give us these fairly strict structures and parameters that you can then rupture and rearrange in different ways to actually create spaces of performance, activity, creativity, where divine encounter becomes possible. I'm not especially interested, and might be where I differ from some queer theologians. I'm not particularly interested in writing about God. I'm interested in writing spaces through which God will make Godself known. Am I doing that? Okay. Yeah, so that rupture, what it does is it takes something really solid, breaks it apart to release the spirit, to create this transcendent moment of what's possible. I'm trying to think theologically,
I mean, the French do call orgasm the little death. It's supposed to prepare you for like the real death of like letting go. So I suppose in that respect, it's like she's like not the only person in the world to think that like orgasm sex is like a transcendent experience. So I'll give her points on that one. I'm still not so sure how the BDSM comes in except for like the whipping of Jesus or something.
don't want to shock you with BDSM, but there's something where if you went home and now and began to think about God's power
But
and
what
began
the,
to
wait,
think
hang
of it
on.
along the line.
What the fuck are you guys talking about while I'm not there? I'm serious. I have not been in on any of these conversations. What are you guys having like secret orgies in the Discord when I'm not there? I thought you were just reading like erotica with Jennifer. Yes, that really does happen in my Discord. I've walked in on it accidentally. All right. It's very wholesome.
Of certain kinds of sexual practices that we never talk about in church, and that are certainly not sanctioned by church, then it would start to ripple out and begin to have a systematic effect on the way that you think about God.
See,
That's what
everyone's
I'm
running to
looking
join
for,
my
something that
Discord
is
now. They're like,
powerful
"Oh,
enough
I didn't
to
know
actually
before."
rearrange the whole system we have moving subconsciously in our minds, and under the surface of our bodies to see what can happen when you rearrange it.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Like, especially if you look at the uptake in some churches, I think people are attracted to the queer stuff because they might see themselves represented in that move, but also there's this destabilizing.
Hi, Jennifer. This is a great presentation. Jennifer, have you been here the whole time, or did you just walk in? Jennifer, you need. Jennifer, you need to go back to the start of this presentation, okay? You're gonna love this. This is gonna be like the best presentation you've ever seen in the history of happy hour, Jennifer. You just need to go back to the beginning. Do like ×2 speed. You'll understand. Everyone, make sure you mount that like button. You can mount the like button in whatever way you see fit. If you want to gently mount the like button, if you want to spank the like button, if you want to ravage the like button, there are any number of things you can do to the like button right now. It's all based on your personal preference. Everyone, it's no shame in whatever you want to do, but I do appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, you need to rewind this shit. Yes, you do.
And current to queer theology, right? There is that disruption, there is that contestation and the rearranging. But from what you're saying, there's also a consolidation, right? There's also a putting back together, a inhabiting the tradition in a way that people might think is pretty unusual for someone writing about BDSM or bug chasing or whatever it might be. I brought it in.
What the fuck is bug chasing? Is that like a sexual term?
So yeah, can you talk about that? Like, what are the norms for that consolidation, right? How do we actually figure out what are we going to keep and put back together? Because I mean, you were talking about John Donne. It is a 3-person God that you want to be battered by. You've written a pretty orthodox.
It is a 3-person God that you want to be battered by.
Christology, even if you use Friedrich Schleiermacher. Like I said, in many ways,
too big of a laugh for a Schleiermacher joke.
This is how you know that you're a nerd, friends. Yeah, so like,
that's the Holy Trinity. Holy shit. Holy shit. They're saying that you want to be battered by the Holy Trinity. I hadn't even put that together. See, this is how you know I'm not a Christian. I don't think in these terms. It's like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? Her argument is that queer theology is about being battered by the Holy Trinity and like exploring the power oh yeah, this is gonna get worse. This is gonna get like a lot. Oh. I'm sorry. I swear to God, I'm gonna start acting like an adult at some point in this presentation. I'm sure, but they're honestly in a church suggesting that queer theology is about a gangbang with the Holy Trinity. Beth, you have to be strong, Beth. You have to know what's taking over your churches, Beth. You can't rescue your churches if you don't know what's going on.
What are your norms for figuring out what stays, what gets inhabited, what gets reconsolidated, what's worth keeping?
Nothing is ever left forever, and nothing ever stays forever. The way that I think about the norms are that the consolidations are fleeting, they're fragmentary. I'm always held. I know this is what we were talking about beforehand. For me, scripture and the theological traditions, historical theological traditions, have absolute authority on the way in which I think about God and relate to God. The way in which that authority functions might be different than the way we expect that authority to function. The authority is there in terms of I cannot throw anything away, but the wrestling with it is what is required. And when I'm doing that wrestling, I'm thinking along the lines of an approach to theology that's very aesthetically based in terms of kind of pulling together these orthodox ideas for a moment and then letting them release. I mean, everything
Release
sounds sexual when you're
indeed.
talking about queer theology, but they contract, they release, they come together, they do some magic. Like there's an ebb and flow, and theology is not something that is static. It's something that is continually producing and reproducing itself. And as the theologian, I see myself as someone just a part of that wheel as it turns, and one who is kind of moving the pieces around as they go. It sounds like that could be either completely dogmatic or entirely in full-on relativism, depending on like which side of annoyance at this kind of.
Excellent. So, in wholesome news, where we're not talking about a gangbang with God, The movie that we're watching on Sunday in the supporter Discord is indeed Independence Day. I was right about that. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, so I'm sure it's going to be great. Please make sure you sign up to join us in the supporter Discord by becoming a supporter on my Substack, on the YouTube channel, in locals and Patreon, and it will be much more wholesome than the presentation we're watching right now. I promise you.
Stuff you stand on. But I would say that that is the life of the Spirit, and that we are continually sort of in this cycle of trying to approach the divine using these resources, these tools of thousands, 2,000s and then thousands upon thousands of years of wisdom that we draw on as Christians.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting too, given that there might be some people who see queer theology, pick up a book by you or a Lynn Tonstad or Marcella Authas Reed and say, this is straight up heresy. I think harder to do with a Lynn Tonstad maybe than an Authas Reed. But what I think those critiques fail to consider is just how open and porous our doctrinal inheritance is, right? So Christians would say, we had the Council of Chalcedon, right? And that's where the church said with sort of authority that Jesus is fully human and fully divine, and he has two natures. They don't mix. They're not confused. There's no overlap, but absolutely no word.
Hang on, my website should not be down. My website was up yesterday. Something is going on with my website host. Let me just check. It was actually up yesterday and then it went down again, apparently. It's down again, those fuckers. So I contacted my website host after the stream yesterday and I was like, what the hell? My website's down. And they're like, are you sure? Have you checked your website? And I was like, yes, I checked. It was down. And then I checked it again and it was back up. So let's just maybe wait 15 minutes and maybe the website will be back up. Something's going on with the website provider, but don't worry. You can always check out the Substack. That's okay. Anyway.
Whatsoever about how they do interact. So it says, here's a very loose framework on how not to think about Jesus, but that leaves a whole world to think about Jesus, right? It licenses further reflection. And it seems to me that you want to inhabit queer theology right in that space, saying that this is more of an ecosystem than a system, right? This is more of a baseboard upon which to build than a ceiling that we must remain in, right? Even if we might have to do a new subfloor every once in a while.
Yeah, I'm thinking, so when I think about these sort of, Chalcedonian rules, I think of them less as sort of the rules that hold us in, beyond here you cannot go. They're actually a set of what's it called when you hang a picture on a wall? No, you hang a. Oh,
hang on. Like I said, guys, the website was up yesterday. I don't know what's going on. I haven't looked into it, but the website that you should be concerned about is the Substack. There is some stuff on the other website, but really most of the stuff is on the Substack now. So just go to the Substack. This is not the end of the world.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. I have to share it. So Morgan and some other people know that I'm recovering from a concussion right now. And so some words are just not coming to my mouth when I need them. I've also developed a bit of a stutter and some thinking is a bit hard. So this is not a castanet. This is
now I look like a jerk, eh?
It's a little anchor you put in the wall to hang your pictures on, is what I was going for there. Yeah, so we've got a set of questions that we ask every time we talk about Jesus. And it's a failure of imagination, I think, when Christians say, you know what? I just don't think he was divine. He's just human. He's a good guy, and I've got a lot to learn from him as a good guy. I'm not sure he was a good guy. I mean, he did Friday, a lot of really weird and sometimes mean stuff. So to me, it's not like, do you pick human or divine? Do you pick nature, whatever? This is a set of questions that we continually ask ourselves through time. And the normative frame for me is that these are the questions. I cannot escape these questions. When I'm talking about Jesus, I got to figure out human and divine and how, and what does that mean? When we're talking about two natures, well, okay, but they didn't say what natures were. They don't say what a self is. These questions get asked differently in every generation, and they get answered differently in every generation, depending on what we think a self is, depending on what we think any other philosophical concept that's at the heart of the moment these rules were made up. I'm less interested in saying, oh, that was a whatever century, and so therefore I don't need to do that anymore because times have changed, and instead saying, they came up with this little set of criteria. And those guys were my ancestors. They were my ancestors in Christ. And they gave me a set of really good questions to keep asking in different contexts. And so I want to take those ancient questions and ask them now in light of gender diversity that we are beginning to understand, in light of sexual diversity, in light of practices around desire, less interested in
For those who just joined, like Sassy, this presentation is from literally 24 hours ago. It is brand new. We are some of the first people to see this on all of YouTube. It was streamed 24 hours ago from a church in Toronto. So this is in Canada, thankfully, but this is brand new.
identities. I'm more interested in practices. How, through certain practices, do we become shaped as lovers of God? That's what
Lovers
excites me.
of
And
God.
that's what I think those
I bet it
ancient
does.
questions, they become authoritative
I
for me
bet it
because
does
they give me
excite you to
something
be a lover of
outside of
God.
myself and outside of my time and outside of my space to keep asking questions I would never think of on my own. They bind me to something that I wouldn't choose in and of my single selfness. They push me into ways of relating that I wouldn't pick on my own.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Well, and then you talk
To add in a good way.
in a good way.
If you get pushed.
Well, and so you talk about practices, right? And that puts us into our everyday lives, right? And we are made by our practices as Christians, right? And so, what do you think queer theology and its attention on these sort of practices that form us, right? What does that have to do with the church, right? Because we can talk about like Lee Edelman and queer negativity and anti-futurity and all of these sorts of things. And that's great that we have people who think that, right? What does that mean for the church, right? Why would churches care about queer theology? What would a queer theology in practice look like in a congregation?
That's a great question. I mean, why are you here tonight?
To have a gangbang
I
with
don't, I
God,
mean,
apparently.
so, okay, we're doing this sort of esoteric thing of talking about queer theology tonight. You probably would get more people if we were having a town hall on how to be more inclusive, because that's where the church's conversations are mostly happening. And again, very, very important conversations. I cannot state enough how much I think it's important for churches to be inclusive and affirming. The queer theological conversation often doesn't happen in the everyday life because it's the place where it wants to be more disruptive of that. So I teach queer theology to my students because I have students coming in who think that being inclusive and affirming is the end of the story. We've done that now. We've put on our pride flag. We're good. Let's go. And I want to work with students to say, you know what, actually, things are changing constantly. You need tools to be thinking beyond. We've decided to let this narrow, understood group of particular queer people into the church, provided they get married, provided they do this, that, and they don't talk about this and that. Queer theology is trying to be more continually disruptive than that. Queer not as an identity, but as a verb, as a continual challenge to a form of sexual status quo and gendered status quo. So I don't know. I don't know how well it sort of slides quickly into everyday church life, because I think
I don't know how well queer theology slides quickly into church life. Oh my god. Probably not as quickly as she wants God to slide into her. I'll say that.
it's a lens, a critical lens on trying to disrupt us when we think we've made it. Queer is to queer. It's to make strange what we have accepted as no longer strange. I'm trying to think about how to pull that back into my mouth so it doesn't sound offensive, or to add the words to make it sound less offensive, but it's an attempt
Well, saying you're going to pull it into your mouth is probably not the best way to say to say it in a way that's not going to be offensive. She's going to pull God into her mouth in a way that it's definitely not going to be offensive to Christians. Absolutely not.
Continually push and say, don't get
Continually
comfortable
push.
thinking you figured it
Yes.
out. There's someone you're still forgetting. There's something you're still forgetting. There's something that's still possible. There's something that's still open. And for inclusion, but also, again, for relating to God. There are things happening in people's lives that we don't know about, where like they're having these wild encounters with the divine, and this widening of our understanding of sexuality opens up space for that.
Oh, does
So I
it?
don't think it,
Does it
I mean, I
open
sort of
up
like my students
space?
will often say,
Does
well, how
it?
am I going to preach that? I'm like, I don't know how you're going to preach that. Like, it's not,
You're
it's
the
not,
student. You figure it out. Yeah.
it's not direct from here to the pulpit.
If I had understood what we were going to find in this presentation, and yes, this is real life. If I had understood what we were going to find in this presentation, we would have started at the very beginning with like, excuse me, with like, number of sexual innuendos. She's a reverend. This is an ordained person. It's just making sexual innuendo after innuendo after innuendo after innuendo after innuendo. This is a fetish for her. You guys understand that, right? We are watching someone play out their god fetish like on the internet right now.
But if I'm helping to equip ministers who are thinking in much more expansive and disruptive
Helping
ways
to
about
equip ministers,
sexuality,
indeed,
then they're going to
for
be
their gangbang with the
like I
divine.
do when I preach, dropping little things into the sermon that might not sound like they're about sex or identity or gender, but are again sort of thinking about desire, thinking about ecstasy, right?
So she's training ministers to drop things into presentations that are like, they don't sound like they're about sex and desire, but they're really about sex and desire in the church.
Who thinks about ecstasy anymore in church? I'm always trying to preach ecstasy. I want to unlock and overflow and pour out and spill all over.
Oh my God!
I don't know if
expect
you're
to
into
see
that.
We're watching that again. I'm sorry, this is crazy. She just wanted my cup runneth over too. Apparently, so does hers in the church. God definitely did slip into her DMs. It's true. This is the Christian Kundalini right here. Let's watch that last bit again. We're gonna. I'm not gonna like interrupt it or anything. We're just gonna enjoy her God fetish. Let's see. We got a super chat coming in from Rottweiler. Of course, she's a textbook liberation theologian. Sure, healthy sex discussion should be happening, which is why Marxism is infiltrating real easily. Well, I mean, I'm all for healthy sex discussion. I just think that, like, it's a bit much. We've even scared off Beth. Beth, thank you for trying. Oh yeah, this is definitely going to get me subs. Oh sure. Yeah. Yeah. Beth, go read Transgender Marxism. It'll be a nice break. Transgender Marxism is going to seem sane compared to this shit. All right, let's watch again.
Pull that back into my mouth so it doesn't sound offensive, or to add the words.
Let's go back a little bit more because I definitely want to get the part about her pulling God back into her mouth.
Go. And I want to work with students to say, you know what, actually, things are changing constantly. You need tools to be thinking beyond. We've decided to let this narrow, understood group of particular queer people into the church, provided they get married, provided they do this, that, and that, and they don't talk about this and that. Queer theology is trying to be more continually disruptive than that. Queer not as an identity, but as a verb, as a continual challenge to a form of sexual status quo and gendered status quo. So I don't know how well it sort of slides quickly into everyday church life, because I think it's a lens, a critical lens on trying to disrupt us when we think we've made it. Queer is to queer. It's to make strange what we have accepted as no longer strange. I'm trying to think about how to pull that back into my mouth so it doesn't sound offensive, or to add the words to make it sound less offensive, but it's an attempt to continually push and say, don't get comfortable thinking you figured it out. There's someone you're still forgetting. There's something you're still forgetting. There's something that's still possible. There's something that's still open. And for inclusion, but also, again, for relating to God. There are things happening in people's lives that we don't know about, where like they're having these wild encounters with the divine, and this widening of our understanding of sexuality opens up space for that. So I don't think it, I mean, I sort of, like, my students will often say, well, how am I going to preach that? I'm like, I don't know how you're going to preach that. Like, it's not,
You're the student, you figure it out. Yeah.
It's not direct from here to the pulpit. But if I'm helping to equip ministers who are thinking in much more expansive and disruptive ways about sexuality, then they're going to be, like I do when I preach, dropping little things into the sermon that might not sound like they're about sex or identity or gender, but are, again, sort of thinking about desire, thinking about ecstasy, right? Who thinks about ecstasy anymore in church? I'm always trying to preach ecstasy. I want to unlock and overflow and pour out and spill all over the place.
I want to unlock and overflow and pour out and spill all over the place in ecstasy in church. What could possibly go wrong? There were like 15 innuendos in like that last 3 minutes, in case anyone wasn't keeping count like I was. Exactly, wild encounters with the divine, kind of like Nexum.
I don't know if you're into that at St.
Sunday.
Andrews, but that's the stuff that's been shaped by my queer theological imagination. It's a more ecstatic relationship with the divine. I think that's where it comes into daily church life, of giving people permission to overflow, be too much.
Well, and I think, the other thing too with queer theology, and using that as kind of a framework for church life, for our own theological thought, our own practices, and that sort of thing, is that what is now indecent will at some point probably become decent, and then the goalposts shift, right? And so, like you said, it's a constant state of vigilance. And yet, at the same time, and I remember having a class with you in first year, I think it was context of ministry or something like this. And you made us watch I won't say what movie it was, but you made us watch a fairly interesting movie with Ryan Gosling, if you remember.
That one. Oh, I was thinking of a much worse one. No, that one was fine.
Which movie?
And it was interesting because I think what you were trying to get us to see in this movie that was a little bit avant-garde in some respects.
Well, it was 10 years ago. Yes. I don't use it anymore because it's so naive now.
But I think what you were trying.
What movie was she talking about with Ryan Gosling? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I'm looking up IMDb from 10 years ago. What movie with Ryan Gosling? Okay, bot. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And to have us see was that we actually do have boundaries. We actually do have norms. And the fact that norms and boundaries exist, and there is, we all have our own decencies, right? So we can't pretend that we're not. We can only draw our circle so wide. And for everyone who sort of wants to say, oh, we don't have a circle, you do. But to subject them continually to kind of this queering process, right?
I think it's only God forgives. I agree with that.
What's the importance of these norms? Why do we have them?
Yeah, I wanted to get students thinking about what their edge was. So someone help us. What's the name of this movie where Ryan Gosling has an affair with a real doll? Lars and the Real Girl. Oh,
Lars and the Real Girl. That's the name of the movie. Did she just say she was trying to edge the audience? Lars and the Real Girl. He has a relationship with a sex doll. Really? I didn't know Ryan Gosling made a movie about a relationship with a sex doll. Huh. Fascinating.
So I was using that 12 years ago when I first came to Emmanuel, and back then it was quite radical. He's having this relationship with this doll, and sorry, do you all know the movie? Okay, some do, some don't.
Consider yourselves lucky.
Oh my
Okay.
god, it was one of Ryan.
It was weird.
Well, I stopped using it because it just seems too normative at this point. But
Hang on. Oh shit! I just screwed that up big time. Hang on. I have no idea where we ended up. I accidentally went back to the beginning. Oh no! We'll find it.
a very realistic.
Oh, I think I've actually kind of come back to where we were, but I wanted to show White Wizard Alex says, as a Catholic, I'd literally rather be required to trip the drug ecstasy than get involved with this lady's brand. I promise you, White Wizard Alex, you would have so much more fun on ecstasy than you would watching this presentation right now. It's light years better. You're making exactly the right decision. All right, I think this is about when I accidentally screwed that up.
Yeah, I wanted to get students thinking about what their edge was. So someone help us. What's the name of this movie where Ryan Gosling has an affair with a real doll? Lars and the Real Girl. Oh, what? So I was using that 12 years ago when I first came to Emmanuel, and back then it was quite radical. He's having this relationship with this doll, and sorry, do you all know the movie? Okay, some do, some don't.
Consider yourselves
No,
lucky.
no one knows
Okay.
this
It was
movie.
one of Ryan
It was
Gosling.
weird.
Well, I stopped using it because it just seems too normative at this point. But and the church is the most embracing community in this movie, which is quite lovely. And so we were talking about how the church becomes inclusive of this young man who's having a romantic relationship with a doll, a very realistic looking doll. But so maybe it was after you, I began pairing it with a documentary about the men who do this in real life. And all of a sudden, the students who felt like they were so much more open-minded with the Ryan Gosling version had to face the real life guys who were doing this. And then we got to see 5 of them who were doing it. And one was a very sweet story. A couple were upsetting. And all of a sudden, we had to start saying, okay, well, where's my edge? Right? If I'm okay with Ryan Gosling doing it, and in the Ryan Gosling movie, it is also like they start to use some pathologizing stuff around him that can explain it away. But what happens when we see that this is an actual sexual practice that some people engage? Then how does our inclusion become shaped and reimagined by that?
I just want to encourage everyone that if you are having a relationship with a sex doll, you can find a real person to have sex with. I promise you. You're going to have to leave the house. You're going to have to go out and meet people in the real world. But I promise you, you don't have to have a relationship with a sex doll. You can find real people. Having a relationship with a sex doll should be pathologized. I'm not judging because, people like what they like. But if you are replacing real life relationships with sex doll relationships, that's not good.
Okay, I've gone down the real doll rabbit hole.
I think
So, so asking students to actually name not what are my norms so much, but how do I know when I've hit them? How do I articulate them and how do I use them? When I've decided that something is beyond my boundaries of comfort, why? And then if you can begin to understand why you're applying a yes or a no to a certain point, then you can begin to understand how that might shift as well. And so, I was trying to find like a very uncomfortable edge for every student. I sort of had to stop doing it because
She
when
edged
your
her
goal is to like
students.
make everybody uncomfortable in a different
If you don't know
way,
what edging is, don't
But-
worry about it.
it got problematic. But we
I'm
did
not
learn a lot
explaining
about
that
where we
shit.
put our edges and why.
Yeah.
She's really getting
and I'm
off
just
on
looking
edging
at
her
something else
students.
that you've written about indecent
Wow.
theology not being about inclusion. And yeah, you said indecent narratives do not therefore critique theologies that we might deem problematic. Instead, they critique the theologies that good liberal progressives hold dear. Rupturing the heterosexual matrix entails nothing short of dismantling the very foundations of theology so that we can imagine and, more importantly, perform God anew. So you're not United Church, but you're United Church adjacent. You train United Church ministers. You're even friends with some United Church people.
Some of my best friends are United Church.
Some of my best friends are United Church. And theologians, you have an ecclesial office, right, to speak to the church. And so if
Thank
you
you,
could
Bot, for that very helpful
kind of peer
definition
into
of
the
edging.
church from your comfy little cottage next door, what do you see as
See,
some
guys,
of the
I just want to say, this is the type of thing that you only learn on my channel, where not only are we learning about queer theology, not only are we learning about how the Marxist left is infiltrating the churches in Canada and literally in the Toronto School of Theology teaching their students how to drop little nuggets of sexuality about your divine gangbang with God into their sermons so that people can start to think about church as a more, well, ecstatic place. You not only learn about stuff like that on my channel, you learn helpful definitions that can help you with your relationship, like edging is a method of stretching out how long it takes to reach orgasm for one or both partners. Though it's usually thought of as a technique for men to last longer, anyone can benefit from edging. Mount that like button for me if you are appreciative of the diversity of content that you get in your typical happy hour. Cheers, everyone. We do this every Friday at 5 p.m., though I will say they're not usually this eventful.
growing edges when it comes to our more liberal forms of inclusion, especially when it's Pride Month, right? We've been doing that since the 80s, and that's been good work and hard work and long work. What do you think our growing edges are? So it's one thing to say, well, you need to queer and you need to push and lean into the indecency. How do you see that working?
Lean
out
into the
United Church?
indecency, indeed.
Yeah.
Because you were citing Marcella Altos Reed there and Theologies of Decency and Indecency. And it might be helpful actually to give you a story about how she did her work. So Marcella Altos Reed,
Argentinian.
thank you. Argentinian theologian, only female theologian really in her group. And she was working sort of at the heyday of liberation theology in Latin America.
Hey, Autumn, do you think you can get Sam Cedar to bring me on his show to discuss queer theology? Because I would absolutely go on Sam Cedar's show to discuss queer theology. Can we make that happen, Autumn? It'd be the greatest gift you could ever give me. I promise I wouldn't ban you for at least a month afterwards. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Figuratively, obviously.
And paying attention to how these base ecclesial communities had been formed. And then
What are those?
Oh, they're like, can you help me? They're sort of groups of liberation-oriented Christians in Latin America living together, all Catholic, right? Yeah. And this is where the idea came from that God has a preferential option for the poor. And this was like a sort of a mind-blowing idea in what, the 60s, 70s? And so now she would go to these communities and would see that they were beginning to be constructed to be able to basically procure economic goods that the poor people living in these communities needed by telling a certain version of what it means to be poor to a larger Christian audience. And so
I only want to discuss queer theology, Autumn. I don't want to discuss anything else other than this.
The theology coming out of these communities was disruption.
Sam is gonna have to bring his inner edgelord to that discussion. I'm just saying. Yeah, Sam would change the topic. It's true. It would be a bait and switch. I know how the socialists work.
To the colonial underpinnings of most Western theology. All Western theology. And what she began to see was, okay, but we're telling a very particular story of what it means to be poor. And if we're going to be able to get these resources coming in to support these people who are poor, then we have to tell a version of the story that is decent. We cannot tell a story in which there are queer people in these communities. At the time, she would have said things like transvestites or cross-dressing in these communities, people who were partying all night in the bar with a crucifix in their pocket. These are not the stories from these communities we can tell, because that's not going to be the kind of theology that people want to hear from the global South. And so what she did was she started writing the stories of what she called the sexually poor, people who are marginalized because of their sexual identities, practices, and how that intersected with their economic disadvantage as well. And what she did was try to expose the ways in which theological decency forms the stories we tell about ourselves and each other, to make it palatable and acceptable. So when she was bringing shock in by telling stories about foot fetishists washing each other's feet, for example, you can read it as a shocking story.
What? Is that what was going on in the land of Black Lives? Do you guys remember during 2020 when they had all these Black Lives Matter religious like cult ceremonies where the white people were literally washing the feet of the black people? Were those foot fetishes? It just is making me look at BLM in a whole new way. I mean, I don't think she thinks poor people are uneducated. I think she thinks that that people are poorly sexually served, the sexually underserved.
Right? But what she wants to do is show this angle on poverty that completely changes the larger theological narrative around poverty. And she's saying you don't actually know what it's like to be poor if you're only understanding poverty along these lines of decency. So the shock was not just to stress people out, but was to show the paucity of their theology as it was being done. So what's the growing edge? I think the growing edge is to look at when we think we're doing something really great, like being inclusive and being affirming, how are we telling the story of who is being included to make it decent? And in that, how are we telling an untrue story? And when we tell something that's not true, we tell something that is limiting our capacity to encounter the divine. And so what I would think following Marcel Altus-Reed, my hero, is I want to keep pushing on the decency of inclusion, because when inclusion is decent, it is assimilation. You're included if you still look 70% like the rest of us, but not so much if you want to do X, Y, or Z. And so pushing on the decency of inclusion, I think that's what queer theology is always trying to do.
Reminds me of a conversation. I think we've had this conversation a few times, Neil, but about the Bob Cratchit stereotype that we have in our mind, that we want to help people on the streets, and we want to help the poor so long as they look like Bob Cratchit and have 3 clean kids and they have patches on their clothes, but they're clean and well behaved. And that I've never met those people because they don't exist, right? I had another follow-up question there, Natalie Wake-Stevenson, and I forget what it was.
Do you need a minute to think? I don't want you to feel rushed.
No, do you want a minute to talk while I think about it?
I don't know, what shall I talk about? Does anyone have... I mean, I would like to know, you want to keep talking? I am curious to know why you would show up to an evening on queer theology.
I'll run a microphone.
You can shout. There's not that many.
Well, they're not going to hear. Frankie. So that people can hear.
They going into
I just want to
Q&A?
know what it was.
What was?
Queer theology.
Oh, you feel like you still don't know?
No, that's
No.
why I showed up. I wanted. I
None of
wanted
us
to
know. You've only been
what it
talking about your
was.
God fetish.
I asked you a question instead of you asking me one. Okay. Yeah, no, that's right. So why did you want to know what it was?
Because you haven't explained it
Oh, sorry,
adequately.
yeah, I'm a lead singer, so I grew up anyway. I'm gonna pass on that question. Yeah.
Even the audience is
just 'cause
embarrassed
it's
by
on a
her.
microphone.
Other folks.
I wanted to know what queer theology is or was, or what the definition is, or what's included, not included. I just want to learn stuff. And I have friends who are in one of those alphabet things, LGBT, etc. And I just want to understand.
So if you can't hear the woman in the audience, because it's really soft, so I'll repeat. The woman in the audience is like, I just want to learn what queer theology is, and I have a friend that's one of those LGBT alphabet things, and I just want to understand. This like old lady is like generally just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why are we having this sexual innuendo? Even the people in church are made uncomfortable by this conversation.
So there you go.
Is this satisfying so far? Do you feel like we're meeting that hope? Or
No,
do you feel like we're meeting that? Is it
No.
satisfying so far?
I'm not sure.
no. The answer is no, you are not
Discussion
satisfying so
is
far.
narrower than I thought it would be. But I'm still learning stuff, so it's okay.
I'm glad it's okay, but we'll try and broaden then.
Well, and I think you sort of opened this up, right? So it's, we focus on sort of LGBTQ rights, inclusion or not, sexual practices, or kind of the realm of sexuality. But what you've just presented, like queer theology, blows open a lot more than just sexual decency, right? Or sexual practices or Christian sexual norms. Now you talked about like an economic upshot, right? That Marcella Althas Reed is looking at the sexually poor and saying, like, we're telling a very specific story about poverty that is brushing aside a huge swath of people. What other sort of I'm loath to say applications, right? But where else, what other trajectories do you think queer theology opens up for us, right? Because potentially it could open up everything, right? But what do you see as some of the major things that it opens up if we want to go wide?
Well, one of the areas in queer theory that's most interesting to me is thinking about how we understand time through what we would call a heteronormative lens.
Okay, you
How
said
do
you were
we-
not bringing up time. I want to.
Okay.
All right. This shit is about to get real Gnostic, I'll tell you that. Okay. So in in the woo-woo belief, of which I believe this person has a severe bastardization of the art of woo, the concept of time is interesting because in the woo-woo belief system, which I would argue is not the same thing as what these people are practicing in terms of like what James Lindsay might call Gnosticism, but we can have that discussion another time. Time essentially is a social construct. Okay, I'm just going to say it. Time is a construct that isn't really real. In the woo-woo belief system, time is basically everything is happening right now. Everything that has ever happened or will ever happen is happening right now. It's a really difficult thing to wrap your head around, but I suspect that's the rabbit hole she's about to go down, and she is about to completely and totally bastardize what all that means. But we're going to see. Yeah, she's absolutely going to bastardize this. 100%. No, it's not that time is relative, it's that time doesn't exist. Time is something that we've made up in our heads in order to categorize our experience and to be able to understand our experience. But in this belief system, at least in the art of woo, time does not exist as how we think of it. Yes, so time travel is possible. You can jump timelines. Absolutely.
So a lot of queer theory is happening in places like literary theory, art theory. So there's not necessarily like a body of the queer theory so much as in different disciplines, scholarly disciplines, people are trying to queer, meaning disrupt, reimagine, change, bring these sexual lenses to their particular discipline. And as they do that, as we do that, we've begun to find all the many different ways in which this idea of a heterosexual nuclear family shapes so many of the ways that we move through the world and so many of the ways we understand what it is to be in a human body in the world, be a human body in the world. So one is time. One is how we relate to time. There's the idea that this forward drive of time, sort of this heterosexual intersection with capitalism that is always kind of pushing us into a certain set of sexual and economic norms. The disruption to that kind of drive is interesting to me because it removes the idea that things are always getting better, that we're progressing towards something better, that what we should be doing is producing, whether we're producing products or babies. I find that interesting because in Christian history, we've also had a very wacky relationship to time. We live between a beginning and an end, and the end is somehow punctuating the space between the beginning and the end and reshaping it as it goes. We are time travelers as Christians, and
Someone tweet that, please. Yeah.
so we need different ways to think about time, to be faithful Christians. I think that we do. We have promises of what's possible, but it's not among us yet. There's a tension in our life. That is an understanding of how it means to live in time that is very different than the dominant understanding of our culture. And it's fascinating to me that queer theorists are finding the same, playing with the same ideas to think about how do we live in time differently. This is something Christians should be thinking about. Queer theology is exploring this and thinking, how do we relate to the traditions that shape us as Christians? How do we relate to the cultural context that we're in? How are we relating or not relating to the future? Where even is the future? These are the kinds of questions it's stirring up. Again, they don't preach directly, I don't think, but you got to think about time if you're a Christian. I think you do. Do you?
I think you do.
You do. I
You
think
do.
you do. We have
Yeah.
a liturgical year. I mean, we've always done time differently
Yeah.
than everybody else.
Well, explore that connection. The
This is
liturgical
probably
year
the
time
least
topic. I
controversial
mean,
thing they've talked
time
about
is not
so far.
something that we often think about all the time, right? Frankie's putting her hand up. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't hear the person asking the question. I don't know what they're asking.
So is the question like, where did queer theology come from?
That is a good
Yeah.
question. Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a couple of answers. One would be that the Christian tradition has always been queer. And we can look back throughout it and see.
No, I was going to tell a story, but we're not going there.
Okay, we'll come back to that. That there have been these elements, there's always been elements of sexuality and play and identity and gender throughout Christian theology.
Hang on. Jennifer. I think that this would be a perfect opportunity to introduce your mother to happy hour. Nothing could go wrong with this plan, Jennifer. Just sit her down, slide her a glass of rum or wine or whatever her drink of choice is. Let her partake of the Christianity. This is going to be great.
Queer theory was, I guess, like 80s, 90s is where that really started coming into play. A sort of landmark moment would be Judith Butler's book, Gender Trouble, which really helped us reimagine gender in significant ways. And she was writing out of particular contexts, concrete contexts. She wrote quite a bit about drag. And use that to understand gender as something much more fluid and performative, not to mean not real, but something that is much more fluid and something we do rather than something we are or something we have. And that was a real watershed moment for queer theory because it just disrupted what we thought about gender completely. Not that she invented it, she was witnessing it and trying to put it into philosophy. And then the philosophy then sort of re-enters the culture. And then around the same time, you're getting like Eve Sedgwick's epistemology of the closet, and the queer theory and gender theory are really coming together. Like they're developing at the same time because they have similar sets of questions. And so once you start to destabilize gender, then you start to destabilize this very narrow, highly structured understanding of the gender sex desire relationship. And so once gender got loosened at the same time that people were beginning to affirm same-sex rights, existence, same-sex desire, that kind of stuff, then these are working in tandem, and then theologians began picking up. The early theological work would be much more focused on how do we make an inclusive church, how do we make an affirming church, but then it's gone in other directions as well.
Right. I mean, like you could say too that queer theology isn't really about apologetics, by which you might say that like I'm going to make a case that same gender marriage is actually cool. I'm a queer man. I should be able to get ordained. Like those sorts of arguments. it's not really doing those. It's not opposed to them per se, though maybe in their decencying forums, right? If it's trying to clean us up a little bit more and be like, no, we're actually still dirtbags, but you should ordain us anyway. But it's not so much trying to make this case to liberal Christians or conservative Christians for that matter. It's trying to focus on queerness and the God who encounters us in that queerness and sort of run with it intellectually. Is that an okay way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's kind of two different political or theological moves. You always have to have movements that are around identity for acquiring rights for people who don't have them. I would never say don't do that. It's just a different you know, some people like chocolate ice cream, some people like vanilla. I find that what draws me to queer theory and theology is this sort of reimagining of our relationship to God through a wider lens. And a lot
Through a wider lens. Indeed. Andre, thank you for the super chat, my friend. Thanks for all you do for us, Carlin, especially the skills you teach us to fight back against the woke mob. I'm trying, Andre. I don't just try to do shock content, you know? I don't know that I'm teaching much today, but at least we're aware of the widening of the influence that Christ has in our lives, apparently.
that's what most queer theologians are doing. They're rewriting, reimagining doctrine, rereading scripture when you remove or sort of mess with the sort of heteronormative piece to it and you see what you couldn't see there before. But it happens in ways that are not necessarily affirming. Some of the more radical queer theology written by queer people is also wanting to be self-critical, to say like, I'm tired of defending myself to try to get into your club. I want to be with my people where we can be honest with each other about where we need to learn and grow. And so some of the work in queer theology has been around saying, you know, this is a great argument. So like you think of a lot of work around, we have to reread the story of Sodom and Gomorrah as a story of hospitality. It's not really about sex, it's about hospitality. Well, there's great stuff in queer theological work that shows the problems with that approach because it's displacing violence onto another set of people altogether, and how certain moves of inclusion, they require decency, but they also displace the violence that might be coming at me onto somebody else. And so to try to track like a self-critical lens on one's own community as well. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Does that answer the question? I don't know. Are there some other questions? I mean, we're sort of throwing a lot of different stuff out here. Yeah, Jeffrey.
I can't hear it. Hopefully they'll repeat. No, John. Sodom and Gomorrah was a message of hospitality, as this presenter has already taught us. They were simply being hospitable.
No, it makes sense. It's a really good question. I'm just trying to think about how to answer it. Tell me the part where can you repeat that for the folks at home?
So you're kind of saying, if I'm hearing your question right, from theater spaces, there was this uptake in queer performances. Why is that? Why did the church take so long? And then what does performativity look like for Christians? Am I hearing you right?
I can't hear anything. I wish I could, but this is socialist technology for you.
Right. I think you're gonna have to define performativity
Yep.
because I think
Yeah.
it's a tricky word, right? So it has so
No,
many different resonances.
I know, and the intellectual trajectory you've just laid before us is fascinating. So I'm trying to close it down a little bit to not be overwhelmed by it. So just in terms of the tracking, I would say all of these kinds of intellectual discourses are kind of bubbling up simultaneously. And so the stuff that's happening in theater is being picked up by theologians, is being picked up by gender theorists, it's being picked up across the board because these scholarly disciplines are always kind of talking to each other. So it makes sense that there would be those resonances across them. When we're talking about performance or performativity, they're connected, but I'll talk about gender trouble, Judith Butler's understanding of gender performativity for a moment. And what she's trying to disrupt, I'm just gonna take a breath. I can feel my stutter coming in. What she's trying to disrupt is the idea that we have a true gender that we then express.
That is the definition of queer.
I am, at my core, a woman, and I'm going to express that for you.
What Judith Butler is trying to disrupt is the idea that we have a true gender. That's actually really important right there, what she just said, because that's the very basis of what queer is. We talked about this a lot in regards to queer Marxism. They're trying to abolish the idea of gender entirely. Okay? So again, it's not like it's not about they don't care if men transition to women or women transition to men. That's like entry level queer. It's not really about being trans. It's about disrupting the idea that we have an innate gender like identity that we can express. And so this whole idea that like I feel like a man on the inside or I feel like a woman, that's not what the queer Marxists want. They want you to be in a perpetual state of like questioning, a perpetual state of like gender fluidity. Does that make sense to everyone? That's basically what she just described.
And I can express it through my dress, through my talk, et cetera, et cetera. No, this is 90s, so I'm using language from the 90s. What Judith Butler says instead is that gender is not an act of expression, it's a performative act. It's not something we are, but something we do. And the way that we do our gender is that we are continually living amidst a whole set of gender norms, and we are citing them in the way that you would cite a scholarly article in a paper that you had to write in one of your classes. We're citing them. We're drawing them into our own way of performing that is dependent on the understanding of that citation, of that norm, but we're kind of gathering these norms up as we go, consciously, subconsciously, all the time as we're moving through the world. Now, for people who cite those norms in ways that very much cohere with their wider cultural meaning, life is
S'mores
easy.
beer.
It's a lot easier. The more disconnect, and the language Butler would use for this is to say that you become intelligible. You become intelligible to others.
I'm gonna have to fucking read Judith Butler, aren't I? I can barely get through transgender Marxism. I can't do Judith Butler yet, but I feel like I'm gonna have to read Judith Butler at some point, and I'm not happy about it.
As you cite, yeah, you can be recognized. And if you're intelligible, if you can be recognized, no one's going to beat you up.
That's why I didn't want to do the same thing James Lindsay's
you
doing.
Can cohere
I don't
with
want to
those
read any of this shit.
gender norms in the society as you're citing them, as you live life, the more violence you will probably face because you are less intelligible. This is not a normative argument, it's a descriptive argument. what happens across time is that the norms shift as people cite them differently and perform them differently. And it's never that there's not something real or true about us. We're not pretending when we cite these norms. This is just in everything we do, everywhere we go, every
Oh
breath
my
we
God,
take.
Jeff.
We are.
Jeff with the big super chat for the day. Here's towards your reading the Judith Butler Fund. Jeff is already contributing to my therapy bill that I will need to inevitably pay after I try to read Judith Butler, after I try to read Transgender Marxism. God. Thank you, Jeff. I really do appreciate it. Jeff, king of the chat for the rest of the day.
Are performing these norms.
Yeah, exactly. Now I have to do it. God
intuitively
damn
most
it.
of the time.
This is the quandary of
And-
super chats. Now I have to do it.
Am I going down the rabbit hole too hard here?
No, I think that's you're laying it out helpfully, right?
Cheers.
That we were talking about kind of dissolving and consolidating
Yeah.
before, and contesting and disrupting, but then also inhabiting and taking up, and that's sort of what happens with these gendered ways of moving in the world, right? So, yeah, you talked about the sort of usual stuff like clothing or hair or dress, and that's one way. But even how you move your arms in a quote feminine way, right?
I move my arms in a masculine way. What do you?
Well,
I'm quite intentional about taking up a lot of space with my body all the time. I've practiced this for years. I refuse to be
offended she
diminutive.
is.
one could say hypothetically.
Look how
that
offended
if
she is. She's
Natalie
like, I
were
do
to
not
move her
ascribe to
arms in a
gendered
feminine
norms.
way, there's nothing natural about that,
I
right?
take up space.
You might be citing a way that you saw your mother move her body, or other women in your life, and people who are coded that way, and that's where you sort of take up this gendered way of being, right? That's one
Kurt,
very
we don't
specific
need a
example.
Sharon
But
Stone
like you said, it's
moment,
intuitive. You're not
okay?
conscious
Let's
of it,
like
right? And that's
relax.
where I think
I don't need to
performativity
see
can get
that.
tricky, because when we say someone's performing, you're putting on an act, right? You think that you're thinking about doing something, and then you're doing it. That's not quite what Butler means by performativity, is it?
Right. So for them, it's not. There's not a fakeness to it. It's not that you're pretending that you're something you're not. It's that there never is a stable something that you are. What you are is always becoming. What you are is always being made through your actions in the world, including your gender falls into that as well. So this is destabilizing for approaches to thinking queerly that want to begin from born this way. Born this way.
Sorry, Lady Gaga.
I love Lady Gaga. I'm not dissing Lady Gaga, but the idea that like the truth of who I am. This is pushing people into situations where they kind of have to say that, and that there's I think Butler would say there's more of a fluidity to gender, that there's not a fixed way of understanding gender. It's that there's not a fixed way of understanding gender. Right? I might truly feel a certain way. I might have a certain gender, perform a certain gender, but our understanding of gender is always fluid, is always changing. And that's what we're continually changing through our performance of it. I feel like I'm expressing this really poorly and performing it badly too. Does that make sense? I don't know. I don't know if it's that one-to-one. I think what we're trying to do here is give a different way of describing reality that might cause some sort of a shift. And when you're having these shifts in how we understand reality, you can just like carry them into the church and use them in a new way. But I think this kind of gender performativity idea is now surrounding us in terms of our understanding of gender. As a fluid thing.
I mean, I would say kind of two things, I think. One, there's like a sociological level that we could talk about here. So if you're talking about gender or identity being constituted by, Butler would say kind of like a discursive community, right? So like a community with norms and expectations and ways of moving. The church is part of that, right? What it means to look like a woman or a man is impacted by the community that you belong to religiously, right? I think that's kind of intuitive for a lot of people, right? There's gender norms, there's gender roles, all of these sorts of things, fine. But this question about performativity, right? That we are what we are in doing what we are, right? One of Butler's famous lines is, "There's no doer behind the deed," right? We're made in the doing. Sounds to me like a lot of Christian practices, right? Read through scriptures, right? There's a lot of disruption, and there's a lot of people becoming in the doing, right? I think of like the stories of Abraham, for instance. Preaching on him on Sunday. Things like baptism, right? We talk about sanctification as regeneration, right? You're being molded and remade into who you are in Christ. That's not to say, again, like there's this one-to-one correspondence between what we would say theologically and what queer theorists are saying. I think that cheapens both accounts. However, that's not to say that there's a world of difference between them either, right? There's resonance, which is why people do something like queer theology, There's enough there to work with.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to name the church as one of these discursive spaces as well, and that I'm not sure it's participating in it. If we're thinking of the church as its own sort of like closed
Enclave,
system, then I would want to question that as well, and that the church, and as I know you would too, the church is embedded in, connected through, constituted by, as it also in its moments helps constitute the wider society in which we live. And so the more that we begin to understand the fluidity of gender in the wider society, some churches are embracing that as well, right? You said I'm to the side of the United Church. I actually have a deep vocation to training ministers for the most progressive denomination that I've ever encountered. Like, this is a gift to me.
To say is that you're not yourself United Church.
I am technically not, but I have a deep vocation with and for the United Church, and I think it's the kind of space that already is affirming and inclusive in so many ways. And so I would want to think with communities that have already done that work about how to keep opening and challenging themselves towards something new, challenging ourselves towards something new. I'm a Baptist. I can't do that with my people. But this is the kind of place where that can happen. So I think we probably agree. It feels like it happens way too slowly, but no, I mean, it does. But that connection to the wider culture, I think theologically, we're moving across these spheres all the time. Does that answer it?
I'm going to leave some space for some more questions, and there's lots to think about here. So I'm going to leave a perhaps uncomfortably long silence just to let people formulate.
Oh, good. An uncomfortable silence. With a giant trans flag in a church.
I personally love awkward silence.
I do too. I know. This is like where the YouTube people can like fast forward later. Frankie.
Oh no, we're not fast forwarding, honey. We're just letting it we're letting it play out. It's cool.
Have you been listening to the last hour? None of this was fully formed, Frankie.
And again, guys, I can't hear the question, but hopefully they'll repeat it. But I cannot hear what's being said right now. Hang on, pause. Got a super chat from Rottweiler. Thank you, Rottweiler. I can only imagine the unsuspecting, God-fearing granny going to church, wanting to pray, and finding this happening instead. Well, You know, it is what it is. I agree with that. Thank you for the super chat. Jennifer says, do they pull out their vibrators with their hymnals? Jennifer, why would you ever suspect they're doing such a thing? Just because they're talking about having a gangbang with the Holy Trinity in order to better commune with God. Get your mind out of the gutter, Jennifer. Jeez.
Okay, so Frankie's asking a question about the relationship between queer theology and private and public in the way the church understands itself and spiritual practices. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think part of what you tangentially helped me piece together there is that the relationship between Christian theology, because you took us back to the BDSM and kink stuff.
Oh, excellent. We get
Putting
to
Christian theology
excellent
side by side with queer theory lifts the questions of each out to ask the other. And so, for example, in Christian theology, we've had a long-standing conversation around power, God's power, human power, God's agency, human agency, and kind of maybe needed some more resources for thinking about that. At the same time, in queer theory, you're getting questions arising about power and power differentials and how to think about power. Feminist theory having a lot of concerns about patriarchal power that became sort of kink shaming. And then in queer theory, moving into thinking about power through kink and BDSM practice. So this is where the conversation starts to become interesting, because you've got a set of sexual practices that think about power in a certain way and give us a lot of good material and theory and thinking and structuring to use then and bring to the divine human relationship, which is also a power and balanced relationship. So it's when you get these similar questions across the divide, they become helpful. This is how this relates to the public-private. So on the one hand, you could have a fantastic church movement for embracing kink positive practices. I don't know. Is there like a queer? There are kink Christian community dungeon
oh
places.
My God!
Like there are places where you can.
We had such a nice lull where we weren't talking about kink, we weren't talking about BDSM, we weren't talking about like any of this stuff. It was so nice for like half an hour, and then someone had to ask a question that just like drove her off the cliff again because she obviously has a god fetish. I'm just saying. So, Carlin, like you said, if you this is going to get me in trouble even for reading this bot. If you dominate, then you are the submissive one in BDSM. So, if God is all powerful, does that mean he is submissive in BDSM? God, bot. I am talking about a human experience, okay? So, the rule is that if you tend to be a powerful person in real life, then you need to balance that out some way by taking yourself out of control in other areas of your life. But that is a human experience. God does not have a human experience. God is perfect balance at all times. So God does not need to be dominant or submissive. King Peter of the chat is about an hour behind. Hate posting this. Pegging is welcome in this Christian household. Peter, come on. Jesus fucking Christ. King Peter of the chat knows he can get away with anything. No, bot, because God is also perfect balance. God is masculine and feminine. He is dominant and submissive. He is perfect balance of everything. No, don't Google that. Don't Google pagan. If you Google pagan, it is your own damn fault, whatever comes up. All right, I want to rewind this again just to hear this whole little kink session or like section, I guess. Why not? We're here. We might as well. All right, let's start from there. Not old enough. Not old enough.
Okay, so Frankie's asking a question about the relationship between queer theology and private and public in the way the church understands itself and spiritual practices. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think part of what you tangentially helped me piece together there is that the relationship between Christian theology, because you took us back to the BDSM and kink stuff, putting Christian theology side by side with queer theory lifts the questions of each out to ask the other. And so, for example, in Christian theology, we've had a long-standing conversation around power, God's power, human power, God's agency, human agency, and kind of maybe needed some more resources for thinking about that. At the same time, in queer theory, you're getting questions arising about power and power differentials and how to think about power. Feminist theory having a lot of concerns about patriarchal power that became sort of kink shaming. And then in queer theory, moving into thinking about power through kink and BDSM practice. So this is where the conversation starts to become.
Listen, I told you not to Google pegging. It's your own damn fault what came up, all right? No. I mean, follow your bliss bot. You're old enough, but I wouldn't click on the videos if I was you.
Become interesting because you've got a set of sexual practices that think about power in a certain way and give us a lot of good material and theory and thinking and structuring to use then and bring to the divine human relationship, which is also a power and balanced relationship. So it's when you get these similar questions across the divide, they become helpful. This is how this relates to the public-private. So on the one hand, you could have a fantastic church movement for embracing kink positive practices. I don't know. Is there like a queer? There are kink Christian community dungeon places. Like there are places where you can go and have a community of Christians doing kinky stuff together. And
The bus leaves in front of the church at 9 o'clock.
they're sex clubs. There's sex clubs for Christians.
Wait, is that real? Hang on.
Yes, that's one.
Hang on. Fact check. Are there sex clubs for Christians? Is that a real thing? Can some Christian in the chat confirm or deny? I'm not judging. Most of you are anonymous. There's no harm, no foul. Is she telling the truth or is she making this up? Are there Christian sex clubs where you guys can explore your Christian kinks? And pegging, apparently? And gangbangs with the Holy Trinity? Kind of seems like people think she's lying. No one is saying there's Christian sex clubs. All right, fair enough. Thank you for humoring me.
Version of it. And then the private version can become, if you're a kink practitioner, maybe there's something in there that's helping you think through your relationship with God that will let you take on a new kind of.
Bot, what did you just find? What is this? That is a Christian swingers page, ladies and gentlemen. So if you are a Christian and you would like to meet other Christians that are swingers, just click on that link that Bot put in the chat, and it is a Christian swingers page, and it has an FAQ, and it has a helpful video, and it has an interview with a Christian couple that is also swinging, and it's in Texas. Christian swing. Someone tell. Can someone please email this page to Carrie? Can someone please, who is not me, in any way, of course, email this Christian swingers page in Texas to Carrie Smith? Bot, can you please do that? I'm not. Can you also please email it to Carrie's pastor? This is awful. All right. Well, again, like, I'm not going to judge you. You guys, whatever makes you happy. I'm not going to judge. We have about 10 minutes left of the presentation. Let's get through this.
Power-laden prayer practice. If you're not a kink practitioner, there's still insight there for thinking about, I'm struggling with how I think about divine power in my own life, how I think about the agency of God and myself being an agent in relation to
The next time that Carrie does a live stream, can someone please super chat that into Carrie? I can't. I am not giving Carrie any money and I'm not sending her a super chat, but like, can someone please super chat that link into Carrie's like live stream and ask her if she would like to join a Christian swingers group in Texas? And tell her that it will really help deepen her relationship with God and Jesus and her husband and her pastor especially. This is going to be like the best thing that's ever happened to Carrie's relationship with her pastor in her life is if she joins the Texas swingers community. It will quite literally loosen her up. I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this. No, Peter, I abandoned Grey Rock so long ago. I wrote a whole book about that bitch. I abandoned Grey Rock a long ass time ago because it didn't work. It didn't work. I Grey Rocked that cunt for a year. It didn't work. Well, I'm not doing it. I'm just suggesting that maybe someone in my chat wants to do it, and if no one in my chat wants to do it, that's fine.
this being who has so much more power than I do. I've run out of resources for that, but look, here I can think about this kind of set of sexual practices that opens up new lenses for thinking about that. That might be something that someone takes on in their own private prayer life as well. So there's the public and the private can run across all of this, but the idea that we're having different resources to support the questions these different communities are asking is, I think, something that we've missed saying out loud so far.
Well, and like, I won't go into specific practices that you talk about, but like in the book, you're pretty clear that you're like, hey, I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are like not my practices, right? But even the theory that's coming out of them,
See,
I find very
Tinge
helpful.
is in the spirit.
So how do you do that?
Tinge
How
understands.
does that happen responsibly then, right?
I agree, Tinge.
Because it could become that I'm just dabbling in someone else's practices, dabbling in someone else's thought, and then taking it for my own, and then taking it out of context. So what does that look like in terms of responsible theology and then responsible practice?
Do you mean for the theologian in the book or for the Christian practitioner who's thinking about taking up some kinky prayer?
Kinky
The world's
prayer.
your oyster, Natalie.
Kinky
So
prayer.
in the book, I make sure I'm engaged with people who are writing and researching and doing work in this area to make sure it's anchored not in my own imagination about what might be happening or deploying my own purely subjective experience of certain practices. In the Christian life, we always have to ask these questions of cultural appropriation, and we have different frameworks for how to do that we need to figure out. I think consulting the wisdom of practitioners is an important part of that. And so there are tons of resources for people wanting to think about different queer practices in a way that's not sensationalizing or exoticizing of them, but actually listening to people who do these practices and what it means for them, right? Don't go to 50 Shades of Grey. Go to like real kink practitioners. We're so close to Church Street. Go to a workshop. Like there's communities that we can learn from and be in relationship with or be committed members of that can.
She is sitting in a church right now, encouraging people to go down the street to the sex workshop to take a class on kink. I don't even know what I'm going to do with this video. I feel like I have to make clips of this video. I have to like, so I'm going to have to watch this video at least 3 to 4 times to like make clips of like all the crazy shit that's in this. This is in a church.
expand our understanding in ways that, again, are not like the 50 Shades version.
I'm gonna write a whole piece for my Substack called Introduction to Queer Theology. Let's talk about kink and pegging and gangbangs and BDSM. God damn it.
But if something's ignited your imagination tonight about BDSM and prayer,
Oh my God.
there are resources out there for you to
I know a book.
If something has ignited your imagination tonight about BDSM and prayer, you all know what to do. Go down the street and sign up for your local kink workshop. Go buy a giant dildo. Go join the Christian swingers site. This video is definitely not getting monetized. We crossed that bridge like 2 hours ago.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly, bot. Exactly. Hang on. Go get a Bible and a dildo. Maybe they even come in sets where there's like a version of the Bible that has a dildo this is bad. I'm not going down this road. I cannot. Jennifer says, "So these are the people who use crucifix dildos and butt plugs." Yes, exactly, Jennifer. Well done. Do they really have Jesus dildos? Is that really a thing? Don't make me Google that. I'll do it. I'm Googling it right now.
recommending.
This is gonna go horribly wrong.
It's what's captured your imagination.
Jesus
But dive into your own,
dildo.
explore yourself. I cannot believe
Indeed,
this is how
explore
this is coming
yourself
out.
with Jesus.
What are your fantasies? What excites
Oh
you that you don't say
my
out loud to
God.
people? I'm not going to pass around the mic.
Oh my. I found one. I found a Jesus dildo. Do you guys want to see? Yup, bot. You and I are looking at the same thing. I'm showing it. This video is already demonetized. I'm showing it. That is something. Oh, it comes in different colors. Oh, look at this. We can get one in pink. Do they have different pictures of the different colors? Oh, wait, hang on, look. You can get different colors. Red and gold. I like the gold one. I always like gold things though. And you can have it 7 inches or 10 inches. I mean, bigger is always better. There was really no other way this presentation could end except for the Jesus dildo. All right. We have 6 minutes of this left. Thank you guys for going on this grand adventure with me. I did not. I didn't anticipate. I swear to God, I didn't anticipate any of this. All right, let's wrap up. Let's finish, as it were.
But how is your desire constituted in ways that aren't sanctioned by the church? What do you think about when you're not allowed to be thinking about that thing? And if that's how your desire works, what does that tell you about your desire for God and God's desire for you? What if we haven't put anything outside of the pale of God's desire for us? What if whatever happens in your most secret, scary fantasies that you're not going to tell to anyone but God? What's happening in those? What do those tell you about who you are? Because The way we experience our desire is a part of that repertoire that Judith Butler is talking about when we constitute ourselves. What does that unlock in the depths of who you are? What if God felt the same way?
What
That
if
thing that you
God
can't
felt the
tell
same
anybody
way?
else,
What if
and was willing
God
to meet you in
What
that?
if God wanted to be pegged as well?
It'd be really good. We don't need to say it out loud and then have like a poster that says, now you can come to this church because you think this thing. I'm just talking about what you're going to do when you go home tonight.
Oh my God.
I shouldn't be making eye contact with anybody right now.
No, you definitely shouldn't be.
It's
You have
awkward,
corrupted the
but
old
that's
woman.
okay. I
Well,
think
that's
that's
the-
You have
that's the
corrupted
scribblyest
the
chair.
Yeah, I know,
old
that's really
women
hard to
in
control
the
them.
audience.
Do we have any wrapping up questions for Natalie?
No.
Things that you've heard tonight that might not be super clear. Things
Jennifer,
that you,
I did not
know,
need to
felt
see that,
titillated by
Jennifer.
and
I
you wanna hear
really
a little bit
didn't.
more about.
That's a whole nother level of complicated.
Lydia.
Beth, we have to go back. We have to go. Beth, do you know what you missed, Beth? Beth, you missed the Jesus dildo. This is Beth. This is gonna be no. I can't. I even feel I was gonna show it, but I even feel like showing Beth the Jesus dildo is like a step too far, and I don't want to offend Beth, but it's been eventful since you left, Beth. You may want to duck out for the rest of this one because we've gone off the rails. But I'm not gonna besmirch your God like that, Beth. I'm sorry. I apologize. Exactly. She missed nothing.
Yeah, so students in my career theology class, there's a few different things they can choose from among. So there are options if they want to do something that's much more practical. So there are assignments they can do that are a sermon with a reflection on it. So a sermon where they take a text that they queer, and it's a sermon that they wouldn't necessarily preach from the pulpit, but it's an experimental one. If you were to really take the theory and pull apart this and then have to preach it, how would you do that? And then they can write a reflection on why they couldn't do it that way. So what they've learned that would edge a little bit in terms of what they usually do. They can write like an education plan for doing sex education in a church for youth. And then we begin to think about, so what are the starting points? Where would you start on sex education? We would start with the question I just asked you. What's the desires inside of yourself, and where do you go from there? They can do a liturgy. They can set up a service. Again, that's queering that we do. And so we've done some really funky queer services at Emmanuel with different kinds of responses to them.
Like, you mean orgies?
And they can do
You've
it,
had
then they can write a
orgies?
scholarly paper if they
Are
want
you
to
saying
as
you've
well,
had
going into a
orgies?
deep dive into something. We try to do what we can, like we use art, we use the grad students do stuff. I had a grad student who did an incredible activity during Kink Week where we all had to blindfold
Kink
each other
Week?
and move each other around.
She has a kink week at the Toronto School of Theology, and she is doing kink week activities with her students at the Toronto School of Theology. I'm sorry, what? I know we're almost at the end, but I want to hear that again. I'm sorry.
And they can do it, then they can write a scholarly paper if they want to as
Oh,
well,
sure.
going
It's
into a
important to
deep
write the
dive into
scholarly
something.
paper after you
We
have
try
the
to do what we
orgy.
can, like we use art, we use the grad students do stuff. I had a grad student who did an incredible activity during Kink Week where we all had to blindfold each other and move each other around.
I was in the
Oh
building, but not in the
my
class. And I walked
God.
down the hall when this was happening and
I
saw them all
was
blindfolded and
blindfolded.
laid at each other. And I was like, I'm just gonna go back.
You could sub dom switch, and I was sub, and two of my students were doms, and they
What the
led me
fuck?
around, and we had to set rules. I had a safe word, and it was a very
She is doing activities with her students at the Toronto School of Theology in which they are switching who is sub and dom, and she had a safe word. You're all welcome.
enlivening experience for people, and at least for me, it had an impact on my prayer life for sure. It's in the book because they helped me figure some stuff out through that activity.
Oh, I bet they did, honey. I
Yeah,
bet they
I think
did.
so.
I
That's
bet
in
you
the queer
figured lots of
theology
stuff
class.
out.
You do teach other things.
Yeah, that's just one class I teach every other year. But most of my pedagogy is, most of the ways I teach are trying to orient towards multiple, to a neurodiversity kind of approach and a decolonizing approach to classroom.
Neurodiversity, you don't say. What's another word for neurodiversity? Autistic? So you're specifically targeting autistic students with your Kink Week classes at the Toronto School of Theology, in which apparently you blindfold each other and have safe words? I'm shocked. No, really, I'm shocked.
Activities. So we'd do a lot of experiential learning, a lot of students setting their own goals. I don't know. Some of my students are in the room, so like I might be talking better about my teaching than it actually is. I'm not sure.
We'll let you know afterwards. Any other questions for Natalie?
Everyone's like, no, that's enough.
Well, Natalie, thank you so much for coming all this way from the Danforth. I think when I was billing the event, I said it was going to be a stretching evening, and I think you've given us that.
Indeed, it
you
was.
have a line in Transgressive Devotion that I quite liked. You talked about
transgressive devotion. Now I need to get
of
this book.
Paradigm shifting images, we'll put it that way. There's some shock in there, there's some awe, but you said it's kind of like stretching. It's not so that you stay down touching your toes, it's that when you get back up you see how far you've come. And so I think that's maybe a good way to think about this tonight, right? It's not necessarily about staying in this weird place that you've never thought about before, but when you go home, when you rest with what you've heard here, you might see just how far you've come. And I'd like to thank you for helping us make that stretching journey. So please join me and thank you, Natalie.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, that was far more eventful than I ever thought it would be from the St. Andrew's United Church in Toronto. I'm just curious real quick, what are some other does the St. Andrew's Church have any other presentations about kink and BDSM and gangbangs and orgies and pegging and Jesus dildos and oh, they've got Zadok the priest though. And so there's that. They've got Zadok the priest. Wow. All right, it's like normal church stuff, normal church stuff, normal church stuff, BDSM. Oh, great. Well, that was probably one of the most eventful happy hours that we've had in a while. I don't know if I feel comfortable cuddling with anyone after this. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. I do feel like I need a cigarette of some sort. I feel like I've been a little bit violated. Oh, great. Bot has found where she talks about BDSM and religion. This is why we keep Bot around. Bot is our excellent researcher. She is second to none. Hang on, Bot. I'm going to make sure I pull that up. Guys, this is happy hour. We usually don't talk about sex nearly this much during happy hour. So if you were scared off this week, I promise you that next week, whatever we do for happy hour is probably going to be far more tame than this. I'm shocked. I am genuinely shocked. I'm going to have to spend some time with this. I'm going to have to make some clips. I'm going to have to do some research. I'm going to have to write up a thing. And I do plan on writing up a nice little summary of this presentation over on my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. There are very few times in the past couple years where I have been legitimately speechless and I really just have nothing to say about this. But like, Reagan said it earlier, I think that this presentation may have actually broken me. I think if someone wants to pray a rosary for me, that would be pretty great. I would really appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's going to conclude our stream for right now. I'm going to go, take a cold shower. and possibly drink a lot. And I'm just going to do some quiet reflection. And if you want to be notified when I publish whatever I'm going to write about this, please make sure you subscribe to my Substack, which is Carlin, KAROIN.substack.com. If you want to support the work I'm doing, you can sign up for $5 a month, $50 a year. God knows I would really appreciate it because this is basically my full-time job and we just did that. I just don't even, who else is showing you this on the internet? I mean, come on. Come on. But guys, I will be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. for Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is, of course, where we watch real live socialism. I promise you, it's going to be even worse than what we watched tonight. I don't know what we're watching yet, but it's going to be worse. And with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. I hope you have an amazing Friday. I hope you've got some cold beers. I hope you've got some good food and some revelry. And yeah, just go again. Go do some quiet reflection by yourself with your Jesus dildo. It'll be fine. Guys, take care. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.